Just hitting start now.
Thank you.
Live now.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this rather modern and unusual meeting of the Central Otago District Council. The first time that a council meeting has been done through remote such as this. So there'll be some challenges along the way, but I'm sure that we'll get through our day in good shape. Welcome to the councillors, welcome to our submitters who are joining through the day, and welcome to anybody who's joining online to watch this session. So firstly, we'll get underway with apologies. We have an apology from Councillor McKinley for lateness. Are there any other apologies, Rebecca?
No, there isn't.
Thank you. I'll move Councillor McKinley's apology for lateness be received. Does someone second that?
I'll second that. Shirley speaking.
Thank you, Shirley. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Any against?
Aye.
That's carried. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes from the last meeting. I wasn't actually at that meeting, so if somebody can, who was there, unless there's any issues, if somebody who was there can move those minutes to true and correct record, please.
I will, Your Worship.
Thank you, Neil.
Stephen, second.
Thank you, Stephen. All those in favour? Aye. And against? Carried. A reminder to councillors to at all times be aware of declaration of any interests that they may have, and to make sure that they have a look at the declarations of interest list at pages 21 to 23 of the agenda, and that they update that as required and let us know if any of those are going to cause them issues today. That takes us to now our annual plan submissions, and we have a number of people who are joining us today, which is, as always, excellent to hear from our submitters. The first of those is Matthew Soul, who's online now, and you'll find Matthew's submission at page 216 of the agenda. So, Matt, the floor is yours. You can take it as read that we will have read the your submission, but please speak to it and stand by for any questions.
Okay, thanks very much for the opportunity to provide some feedback. Yeah, firstly on the council's proposal to join the local government funding scheme, I cannot support it. We're in uncertain times where we as humans are living well beyond the life support capacity of the Earth's ability to sustain us, and we're an overshoot in terms of access to cheap fossil energy to power our over-consumptive ways of living. We need to be having a more important conversation about what we can cut to live within the life-supporting capacity of our natural capital. This needs to be over longer, multi-generational timeframes. GDP, or gross domestic product, is a blunt and simplistic measure of progress for a so-called intelligent species. Woefully inadequate as a measure of living and accounting for our effects within our world of difference on our complex, varied and interconnected life provisioning ecological system we live, work and play in. We have been, in our crude measure of progress, experiencing unprecedented growth. The resident population has grown by a significant 20.5% since the last census in 2013. For years, our lack of growth has been bemoaned as a constraint. Now we have unprecedented growth in ratepayers, and still we want more. What is our measure of success? What will the panacea look and feel like? How will we know we have arrived? We need to be looking at our community resilience and living in a steady state within the limits of our ecological economy. And just for interest, economics in the Greek means the management of home, or in our case, our community. In terms of joining the local government funding agent scheme, I need to have the term of any loan set to 15 years, and I need to know what we are borrowing for. We are living within this doesn't make sense. It must meet quadruple bottom line accounting decision making underpinned by social, cultural, economic and ecological environmental assessments, including consideration on the impacts and values that are qualitative. Intrinsic values, what is valuable or meaningful. Bequest values, being bequest value in economics is the value of sustaining and preserving our natural environment or our historic environment. In other words, our natural heritage and cultural heritage for future generations. To me, this appears to be mortgaging our children and grandchildren's future. Our forebears built a lot of our infrastructure for which they paid for and are still enduring, where given good design life, appropriate and timely maintenance. However, in much we have failed to maintain or have failed in forward planning with budgets for replacement, passing on that neglect and burdening the future generations with the cost of our poor discretion is intergenerational theft. It also seems unfair when our generation grew up with free tertiary education, secure government superannuation, to be transferring and further burdening our future generations. In order to support the local government funding agency scheme, I need to have the term of the loan defined and have the purpose for the loan defined. And so at this point, we should not participate in the scheme. I recognise the value of the scheme in terms of some of the best finance available. I just have concerns about living beyond our means. As for rates, this is about living within our means, both as a household and as a community council. A conversation about priorities and choices. As we are rapidly learning from nature with COVID-19 visitation, what we value and need is changing, and we have an opportunity for a more enlightened conversations about what our real needs and priorities are. The increase in residential and lifestyle block values is illusionary. With many on fixed incomes, we are left with choices about what we give up. So while we pay our rates, pay our mortgage rents, discretionary spending reduces or misses out. The folly of the human construct of infinite growth on a finite planet and growing our way to prosperity is touching up on the planetary limits. We must learn and be creative in how we evolve and transition to live as a community within the Earth's ecological economy. It's the one thing that really matters for our future, not this bereft obsession with growth and the folly that the free market will provide. Conversations over what we really need to function as a community, followed by hard choices on what we can afford to be a resilient, self-sustaining community are required if we are to have a prosperous future. Some bold leadership, community conversations are needed over new ways of doing things as the old economic ways are piling up against social, physical and environmental limits. Can I ask the Council where, with the reinstatement of the 4 well-beings and the formal recognition that the councils have a significant role to play in lifting the quality of the life of our people and the health of our environment? And just on a quick note, in regards to council consultation, there's a lack of the email link or written submission forms as in the past. Online submissions, while effective for some, can be limiting in providing a considered response. And I'd just like to finish with a wee reading. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalised greed, inequality, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, extinction. We should not long return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature, by Sonia Rees-Taylor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Matt. Councillors, are there any questions for Matt?
I have, Your Worship.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. If we don't choose to borrow, if and when we borrow, and we're not using the LGFA,
Is
then-
now joining.
then we'll be using somewhere else. Do you have any views about that?
Sorry, it just got interrupted by another. Can you just restate that? Thanks.
The reality is we're going to have to borrow into the future, and you're saying you're not supporting using the LGFA for that to be the mechanism of borrowing. So do you have any views about borrowing from elsewhere?
Sorry, I think the actual mechanism is fine. It's just that I am not happy with. I need to know the time frame and what the actual purpose of the borrowing is.
Yeah, okay, I understand. I guess what this to be is just simply us providing a facility to go to get money as and when we require it, just like anybody else would normally do with a line of credit or whatever else you want to call it in a business situation. So I think that means to me is that what you're saying is that as long as it's done for the right reasons and the right processes, then you don't have a particular view that says that the LGFA is any better or worse than anything else.
Well, I mean, yeah, given the information that I've been provided with, it would appear to make that's the most prudent way of if we have to borrow, of doing it.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Tamer, you had a question for Matt?
Yes, I do. Good morning, Matt. It's Tamer Ali here. Thank you for your
Right.
submission to us. That was really good. I just had a question. At the beginning, you said you wanted council to have some important conversations around what can be cut and what we do fund. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on, are there things that council currently does that you don't think we should be involved with?
I guess, given the COVID visitation, I guess tourism and spending money on that, is probably worthy of some discussion. Yeah, I suppose what I would, what am I trying to say here? I guess what I asked the question about the 4 well-beings. And I've just, in the stuff that I've looked at, I'm just failing to see how well that's been implemented in the council in terms of, I guess, directing your decision making for priorities or cuts.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Tamer. I don't, Matt, I can see on the chat that there are no other questions for you, so thank you very much for joining with us today. It's appreciated. Your regular input is always appreciated, so nice to hear from you, and stay warm out there in Shadow Creek Way.
Yep, and all the best in your endeavours. Thank you.
Thank you, greatly appreciate it. Welcome to Nigel, glad to see you've been able to join us. And Jill Wolfe is our next submitter. You'll find Jill's submission on page 250. Good morning, Jill, how are you?
Hi, good, thanks very much.
A good frost in Naseby this morning, was it?
Matthew Soul.
Is now exiting.
Pretty white out there still.
I can imagine. Jill, you might just hear partway through your presentation Jerry Eckhoff's voice with his name come up. That's what the system does when the next person joins, so don't let that put you off. And if you miss anything or through that, just repeat. But at this stage, the floor is yours. All the councillors are listening, so that you can take it as read that they've all read your submission.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Just who I am, to just give you a quick overview of who I am. I'm a permanent resident at Naseby, and my partner Neil and I have got some holiday accommodation here that we run, and we've also recently started up a Destination Naseby tourism venture to bring groups into Naseby to help promote the economy and help support some of the local businesses that we have here. So that's our love and the desires for Naseby. So, and I'm also the chair of Naseby Vision, but this feedback document that I've done is actually from a personal perspective, not from Naseby Vision. Firstly, the rates option is not one that I wanted to speak on at all. I'm quite happy with what I'd written and what I see others are also dealing with, so that I've let that one pass completely. And also the first issue I had raised on the water, I have since understood that has been actually fixed and the pipes have now all been replaced and everything, so that was fantastic to hear prior to all this. So my two specific areas of interest that are what we're going to talk about, the first one is being the regional identity, the tourism and economic development for Naseby. I know there's, and obviously the implications with COVID have changed some of these priorities and bits and pieces for council as well. I'm very aware of that too. So I know there is work happening around the Central Otago World of Difference and the marketing of Central Otago as a region at the moment in all areas. But we kind of feel that when Central Otago is used, there's quite a strong inference to it being based more on the more substantial tourist markets. And sometimes the small towns like Naseby, we feel get a little bit forgotten on it. And I understand that from a financial perspective, sometimes you do have to look to the bigger dollars, but we feel it's like we are part of Central Otago, and we just like to see a little bit of some targeted marketing or assistance, perhaps as part of the World of Difference strategy being directed our way. I guess if you don't put your hand up and ask for it, then it's you'll sit and watch it happening in other areas possibly. And I know the best is being done, but just asking perhaps if we can just have that little bit of targeting. So in my application, I've identified signage, tourism, information, and the dark sky specifically, because they're three that sort of stand out for us. And I'm not saying they're individual requests. What I'm saying is we'd like to work with the council to establish a timed plan to identify what the tourist opportunities for us as a local town are and to implement those. And they will include the signage, tourism information, and marketing of such as the night skies. With regard to the night skies, I know the comment there says it's in progress. Well, yes, that is what is in progress is the IDA application that we're doing, and we've had some good discussion with council. What we're saying is that we should be taking the opportunity to actually market what we've currently got as far as our night skies, which doesn't actually impact on the IDA application or anything like that, but we're really not doing anything to market what we already have and can be using and selling. As far as the signage and that goes, if you look around like Kyburn Cemetery and Hamilton's and some of those, they've got some really nice signage from quite a few years ago with the wee roof verandas detailing what's there. And really we seem to have missed the boat on that one. I'm not sure what happened a few years back when all that signage was done on that, but we really don't have an awful lot in Naseby except a few worn out old street signs, I guess, and as has been highlighted, the very old ones on the main highways coming into town, which we've talked about trying to get replaced for some time. I guess what we're saying is there's so much history here in Naseby, but we really don't make it very easy at the moment for tourists to actually find that history and learn about it and read about it on a walkthrough or something like that, or drive into an area or something. There's nothing there to actually tell them anything about us. And I guess I know we've been planning. We've been talking about this for quite some time. It's just it would be nice to see some action happening. I know there's a tourism route going in, and there's lots of things happening in the future. But we seem to have had that stance for quite some time now. So that's that one. And lastly, the other one I wanted to talk on was the housing in Naseby and the building permits. Naseby is, as you all know, identified as a historic town and registered with the Historic Places Trust as a historic area. The comments made that the plan will be redone in the next district plan, I would like to question. I believe the district plan itself is quite clear in identifying what the historic value and the need to retain it is. I don't see that the plan needs changing. What I do see needs changing is the actual interpretation and how the interpretation of the district plan is done when building permits are put in. Applied for. Like there was a recent one we know of that went in a few years ago now probably, when we questioned why it was allowed to happen in the main street. We were told that buildings from the area are from multiple decades, so it was in keeping. So my point being that previous consent mistakes shouldn't become the standard for what we're assessing with new building permits. The plan is quite clear that we should always look to the historic value of Naseby when we're looking at a building permit. So I would think, to me, it's like the process we should be doing is putting in place identifiers that must be met to support the intent of the district plan. For example, rather than looking at what the era of the buildings are in the immediate area, it should be based on the historic building criteria, rather than actually just creating another mistake in the building. So I think the rules are quite clear in the district plan itself. But I think it's very hard when you've got multiple people perhaps signing off building consents that yes, they've all got an interpretation, and sometimes the easier route seems to be the one that's taken. But a listing of tick-off points basically, or however it's done, I don't know, but a much more defined list of what must be met to obtain a building permit or to get something built or transport something, and I think would be a blessing for Naseby before we actually head down a track of losing what we've currently got, because there's quite a few building sites that have been sold recently. So we're seeing quite a few potential new buildings coming in the next few years. So this one to me is quite an urgent matter as well. And that's me.
Brilliant. It's a very full submission, and thanks for all the work that you do with your team at Naseby Vision. I see, Lindley, you had a question?
Oh, hi, it's Lindley here. Thanks for that submission, Jill. I just wanted to say that I think Naseby Vision is doing a fantastic job, especially with your new Facebook page. Is that yours, Destination Naseby?
Yes, the Destination Naseby one is we've just launched that last week. Yeah, we're really pleased with it.
It's really fantastic, and I happen to be lucky enough to be in Naseby in the weekend, and I noticed how many of the domestic market was actually in Naseby. And with regard to the dark skies, I saw the 60 satellites go over on Saturday night. Was that Saturday or Sunday?
Oh, did you?
Absolutely fantastic. They're all information, and I think the night sky. There's a satellite app that you can get, and I think Naseby, you're right, to market that night sky is one of your best assets. So thank you for your submission.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the kind words.
You're welcome.
I know, Jill, I sit on the Tourism Central Advisory Board, and from the perspective of that board and TCO, Naseby's seen as absolutely one of the jewels in our crown. So if that's not getting fed through, or you're not recognising that, please take my assurance from sitting there that our thoughts often go to Naseby and what a treasure it is, and that night sky in particular is definitely an asset. And I think over the next year or two, with domestic tourism suddenly becoming the only tourism, and people from up north wanting to get some fresh air and space to move and breathe, Central Otago, the Maniatoto and Naseby are going to become, could even see some growth.
64344888733 is now joining.
Carry on, Jill.
No, I think you're right. I think we're sitting in a very prime position, the whole area, Central Otago at the moment. Yeah, it's a very fortunate place to be in, isn't it?
It is. That's a very good way of putting it, because it's a terrible time we're going through, but I wouldn't want to go through it anywhere else on the planet, quite frankly.
Yeah, true.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Jill. I don't see any other questions from other councillors. There's been a couple who have said on the chat that they agree with Lindley, with Lindley, and I hope Naseby Vision realises just how much we all recognise Naseby as the treasure it is. And thank you for that very detailed submission. All right, take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, we should have Jerry Eckhoff on the line. Good morning, Jerry.
Is now exiting.
Yes, you have on exactly that, Tim. Good morning. Good morning, councillors. Just tell me when I'm ready to go, Tim, or whatever.
Yes, you can take it, that your submission, take it as read, Jerry, and you're free now to speak to it. The floor is yours for 10 minutes, allowing some time for questions within that 10 minutes.
Thank you. Look, I'm sure, without having heard what other people are saying, which is a bit regrettable, but it's just the way things are, of course. Can I just say, look, telephones I'm not very good on the phone. The distortions that occur due to hearing aid technologies, despite being very good, can sometimes make life a little difficult for me. So bear with me, I hope, and we will get through this quite quickly. My comments, and I'm fully aware, of course, that this is a annual plan. It's pretty much the housekeeping budget, if you like, for the council, as I see it. So my comments are in part, of course, focused on that, as well as I think just a few general or generic observations, not specific to the CODC, but important, I think, nevertheless. I guess everybody's referring to the extraordinary times that we're living through, which makes one of the more important tasks, which is, of course, expenditure of public monies, even more difficult, because, as I see it anyway, it's difficult to plan a couple of weeks ahead, let alone months or indeed even a year out. But we recognise, of course, that for councils it has to be done. The way I see it is the annual plan really is about how thickly the council can spread the ratepayers' butter on your toast. Well, I think this year all bets are off, and all plans that council adopt must be entirely flexible, because, as I said earlier, none of us actually understand the consequences. And I say this having followed as much as many, or if not all, just the intricacies and the difficulties of what we're faced with both nationally, locally, and indeed internationally. So none of us understand the consequences yet of the economic downturn, which is absolute. Whether it's going to be a recession or a deep depression, we don't know. But of course, life goes on, and local government is an integral part of that. But I suspect that the recovery will come when businesses recover and when confidence returns to the populace in general. And the role of local government, and with the annual plan, is to help in every possible way, which, and this process, of course, is part of that. Now, I was pleased to read just a couple of days ago, Chief Executive Ms. Jacobs say, and I quote that, "We recognise the economic impact of COVID will be deep and for many businesses and households." But she goes on to say that we want to deliver great services while lessening the impact of rate increases. Well, councillors, it's not about lessening the rate increases. In my view, there must be no rate increases. And I know how difficult and I know how much work people have put into getting to this stage, but we need to adjust and be flexible. In my view, your starting point must be just exactly that, a no or a nil rate increase, and I'll explain why I think that can be managed. I'm well aware, of course, that targeted rates are probably the more difficult one to manage. The general rate, of course, is the one that we all pay, and by and large, the general rate doesn't sort of move too much. But the targeted rates can become extraordinarily difficult for areas, and I know Roxburgh, for example, at one stage, early on, of course, but there was talk at one stage of a 15 or 16% increase. Well, it just simply can't happen. Other councils have apparently been receiving reports on nil rate increases for the annual plan. And Clutha just the other day went to a, was it 1 or 2% increase? Okay, well that's their business. But here in Alexandra, we have had one of the highest levels of folk reliant on superannuation. It's the only source of income, and that's here in Alexandra. So life is going to be difficult, and it's going to be different for quite some period of time, I suspect. I can't see it happening, coming out of this situation anytime soon. One of the most important aspects, for me anyway, is that when we look at local government per se, we recognise that, of course, it's a natural monopoly. there's no argument around that. It absolutely is. And so charges and costs can sometimes reflect that situation, despite the best efforts of council or councillors. So that comment is reflective of all councils, of course, and not just the Central Otago District Council. Local government New Zealand, and again based in Wellington, in my view, has somehow managed to vaccinate itself, to use the parlance of the day, against the economic ravages of COVID, or so it would seem. I'm not aware that within local government there have been job losses, pay reductions or redundancies, as has been the case in the private sector. So when the Prime Minister says we're all in this together, really, it doesn't seem to be the case. We have the public sector, and then we've got the private sector is taking a huge hit at this time. So I make no apology really for going into bat a bit for the private sector, for the business houses, and we desperately need to see them with the business as usual sign up in their shops on the streets of Hebrietown.
Mary Ann Baxter.
There's always been a delicate balance, I guess, between the ratepayer and local authorities, and I think by and large there's been respect on both sides, and I'm sure that won't change. As to the housekeeping aspects, the local government funding authority proposal, well, I'm quite surprised that it hadn't been done years ago. But again, there's not a lot of detail around that. For example, I don't know what the interest rate the local government funding authority can offer councils compared with, say, trading banks. Without that detail, I guess it makes it much more difficult to come up with a logical, sensible conclusion. But that's the way it is. But it seems to me, if you can get that money to use for all manner of things, not just for capital expenditure, if that is legally possible, then I would strongly encourage the council to do so. Finally, I just wanted to touch on another matter that I think is terribly important, and that is under the annual plan, will there be expenditure based on getting the district plan, the 10-year plan, up to date? My understanding is that it's years out of date. It was, in fact, in place the existing plan was in place 15 years ago. And it's a 10-year plan. Now, there's a major hearing coming up in Cromwell in about a week's time, I think it is. And they're referring back to our district 10-year plan. So it's making life terribly difficult. So here I am on one hand saying you've got to reduce cost, but on the other hand I'm saying you've got to get some of these most vital documents completely up to date, and I suspect the use of contractors brought in to work on these documents and get them up to speed yesterday or as quickly as possible is just so terribly important. So yeah, that's about me, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to take any questions or try and answer what I can, but just those major points that I think are important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. We've got time for one question. I see our next submitter is standing by. So, councillors, any questions for Jerry? Doesn't Neil, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just think, thanks, Jerry. Neil Gillespie here. Your comment about the district plan being out of date. I think 6 plan changes down the track. Plan change 5 was one of the biggest ones. Does do a lot towards keeping plans reasonably current, but otherwise your comments are certainly well understood by council. We are working through that review of the district plan. It has a 10-year review cycle on it, but I wouldn't think you could say it's entirely out of date with a number of plan changes that happen, just like other councils do. Queenstown are the best. But, I think your point's well made, but we're got it well in hand.
Yeah, Neil, I'd like to say thank you, but I sorry, I didn't quite catch what you were saying. Look, I won't take any more of your time. You've got other people coming. But again, thank you for the opportunity, and let's look forward to the future with a lot of positivity, and the role of council, of course, is going to be very significant in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerry. A pleasure to hear from you as ever. Thank you. Now, we should have Marianne Baxter with us. Marianne, you may just hear some numbers come up as Jerry leaves, and during the end of your submission, or toward the end of your submission, you'll hear another voice come in. If you can just... That's Jerry leaving now.
Is now exiting.
It's just an unfortunate consequence of the system that we're having to use. But Marianne, welcome to the meeting today. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your submission, which you can take as having been read by the councillors. We've got 10 minutes for you to speak to that submission and to us, answer any questions councillors may have.
Thanks very much, Mayor Tim. First of all, just a very brief introduction of ourselves, and thank you also to the councillors for this opportunity. Rod and I have returned to Alexandra to enjoy another time in our lives. Both of us have had careers in working in the public service and have been very involved with regard to looking at change, looking at governance, and working in those fields and working with people, hence perhaps the direction of our particular submission. I am going to read it, I apologise, but I just want to make sure that I use the time as well as I could on behalf of both of us. Kia ora tātou. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to councillors about our submission. While we affirmed option 1 of the LGFA scheme, we did not want council to see our submission in any way confirming that business as usual would any longer be appropriate. When we submitted, we assumed that the council too would be in the process by mid-April of starting to think about what might be involved in beginning to chart a course for a new tomorrow, to quote the Minister of Finance on Budget Day. We have a series of questions that we'd appreciate council considering going forward as part of our oral submission. Given the council's comments on our submission, the recent newspaper reports and today's council papers, our concerns remain. That is, what vision and values inform and underpin your processes and decisions for today and into the future? What opportunities have you all had as our elected members to consider the strategic framework needed now to decide how to use the LGFA funding, and also what is the framework that will now inform the setting of the rates? As part of your governance responsibilities, what dialogue has the whole council engaged in to explore this new normal, this unknown future? In terms of using external expertise, have the councillors viewed, for example, Sharmabil Yaakov's webinar titled, How Can Councils Contribute to the Local Economic Economy? And this was part of a free online series by the New Zealand Economic Development Organisation. Are you accessing and considering global thinking around how businesses might engage with COVID-19? Along with newspaper reports recently noting that the Executive Committee's directions to community boards to reduce rates and this meeting's agenda papers, where is the evidence of new directions in thinking about the impact of COVID-19? At the moment, it does look like business as usual. With newspaper reporting reductions to the budget, it does suggest that this current consultation process today could be seen as somewhat token. That is today too late to influence the rating directions? As an observation, have the reductions been undertaken equitably? Is there a review also of staffing and management costs and priorities here to consider if there can be reductions in spending here too, if that is the direction council is taking? We're looking for evidence of considerable, rigorous, strategic thinking by council as a whole, and also the wider community about what the beginnings of charting the course for our new future in Central Otago could include. We would expect all our councillors to be confident and courageous and collaborate robustly on what is new and uncharted territory for all of us, and we need it to be happening now in the full council and the community. How our government has progressed through these 7 weeks is about working robustly and collaboratively. Just as they're beginning to chart a future with courage, they're learning to remain that it involves remaining vulnerable and resilient too. We need to see and want to encourage and support similar approaches in our council's processes and practices. This is about making live and being accountable to what is at the heart of the council's significance and engagement policy. Finally, we wish to clarify our communications concerns. The attempts cited in the council response to our comments are noted. However, we feel there is an assumption in the council response to our submission that people use Facebook as an expected and preferred professional way to communicate. Our submission encouraged the council to engage rigorously with ratepayers online. That very week, Shamabul Yaqub's webinar about issues for local councils to consider was online. What would it have taken to send this link and others to that series to ratepayers and invite us to debate its relevance to us as a community in an online forum such as Zoom? This would have been more reassuring to us as a community that our council is open and receptive to engaging in robust collaboration about this uncertain future together with us. Instead, given the council's responses to various submitters, it does feel that there may not be an openness to healthy conflict, which is an integral element of robust collaboration. Finally, in closing, we thank you for the opportunity to speak to our submission. We certainly remain very willing and committed to engaging in participatory democracy processes with our council as ratepayers, which we very much see ourselves as stakeholders. Ngā mihi, Marianne and Rod Baxter.
Thank you, Marianne and Rod. Very well thought through and presented submission. And I would have to say that I don't know how many webinars I've been watched or how many Zoom meetings I've been part of, but the one you speak of, Shamabul Yaqub's, was by far and away probably the best one I saw. And I'm aware that many of the councillors have also watched it because we've all discussed it at various times. So we have been constrained, unfortunately, by COVID and having to make some big changes or consideration of big changes at pace. But the other problem that we have is that the annual plan, as opposed to the long-term plan, offers less ability for us to change the steps that we're taking. So I can assure you that once the long-term plan, which the work on that will start usually about 5 minutes after the annual plan's finished, that's going to allow us to have a far greater understanding of the effects of COVID, but beyond that, a bigger conversation with our public about how we're going to react to that as a community. Councillors, I see a note from Councillor Calvert thanking you for your comments, Marianne, and lots of food for thought there. We've still got 2 or 3 minutes with Marianne, councillors, so are there any? Yes, Tamer, you have a question or a comment.
Morning, Marianne. Tamer Ali here. Thank you for your submission. I found it very interesting. I also have watched that Shamabul Yaqub webinar and found it fascinating and agreed with your sentiments on that. And I do like your comments about confident and courageous councillors and decisions going forward. I think that is the council that you have this time around, and I think that there is work going into what can be done as a little bit around.
Thank you, Tama. I guess for us, and with the work that I've done around change, there's very much, there's a lovely statement that I appreciate that Jennifer Garvey-Berger talks about, where she talks about if we're working in obvious or complicated areas, which is part of a quadrant about change, then experience and expertise are our friend. But when we get into complex and chaotic areas, which I would say this crisis about COVID-19 sits very much in, then experience and expertise can actually be our enemies. And that's why for us it's really important that the full council, with that wonderful breadth and diversity that we have, whether it's youth, whether it's gender, whether it's age, whether it's different areas that we're representing and different perspectives we bring, that's why we were imploring that all councils involved, rather than perhaps an executive committee feeling they should take it on, perhaps because they have more experience. What we're encouraging is for our council to see that, in fact, that newness is part of that diversity. That is very much what assists change, and taking it beyond that. So it's within council, looking at how is the significance and engagement policy working out into the community. As we said, we believe we have an amazing range of people, and reading through the submissions as we did, we were very, very excited. And as I said, we kept our focus very narrow, but we're very supportive of the social, the environmental and the economic emphasis that many of our submitters put on.
Absolutely, yes. And I agree that, nobody has experience in dealing with a worldwide pandemic of this scale, so it's certainly uncharted waters.
Agreed.
Yes, it is that. A quick comment or question from Councillor Stu Duncan, but it'll have to be quick, please, because I understand Colin's waiting on the line.
Just regarding your open, healthy conflict, I think you've got a council that really embraces that. We're a diverse group and we're not frightened to have a decent debate, and I hope that is a real risk going forward, that we don't have that real openness for democracy to work. And don't doubt for a moment we've got a great council for that. We're very lucky.
Right, thank you. We very much look to being very much engaged with you as the community too.
Marvellous. Marianne and Rod, thank you very much for your time today. It's greatly appreciated, and for the thoughts that you put into your submission. It's very helpful.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Now, Colin, will just stand by for a moment because the line will tell us that Marianne's left.
Marianne Baxter
is now exiting.
So good morning, Colin Faulkner. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good.
Councillors, you'll find Colin's submissions on page 219. And Colin, take it as read that we've read your submission, and you can speak to it or read it or answer questions, just however you would like to handle your 10 minutes.
Okay. I'm not familiar with this format, but I'm going to give it a go. And I haven't got a printout of the submission because the program didn't allow it. But I've got some notes here, and I'll just go through it. The LGFA scheme, I don't want the council to proceed with that in any form. I believe it's only a way of increasing the rates and making them harder to get the rates down. The rates should be revisited, as the value of the properties is incorrect in today's world. If you were to buy a motel, it's going to cost you a lot less than what it would a year ago, and the farm prices have remained unchanged. Yet the difference in change in the rates is around 50% between the two. Totally wrong. I'll go on to a few other things here that I'm passionate about. The heat pump. Now, Orkney in UK is a great example of heat pumps and how they work. The water's got more energy in it than air, and everyone's familiar about how heat pumps work just with air, which is low in energy, taking say 0 degrees and turning it into 20 degrees. Well, that can be done a lot more efficiently with water. And given the council buildings and their boiler situated right beside the river, it's such an easy source of energy that's running past free, and you're just taking water and returning it a few degrees colder. It seems like a no-brainer to me. That whole area from the police station, councils, and that all could be heated from that source. I brought this up about 10 years ago, it would have been, and nothing, I haven't heard of much happening with it. And a lot of coal's been burnt in the process, nothing happening. Should be looked at immediately. Another thing that I'm quite passionate about is the fact that it took funding from REAP. I'm not too sure how what the theory was behind that, other than that it was publicised that you're playing REAP for the high amount of recycling going on, and people weren't putting it in the right containers. When in fact, it was councils that was dropped the ball there. They should have taken those containers off those people. They weren't contributing. They're just contaminating the recycling, and you should have been praising REAP for the work they do. I want to talk about a bit about their program with the Time Festival. That I've been on every sustainable house tour that they've organised. I've done hot composting. I've done cold composting. I've been to grafting, and in fact I joined that. I'm now a member of the Tree Croppers Association, community garden, archery, the supporting local clubs, copper-thing, the wax wrap instead of glad wrap, etc., using beeswax, beekeeping, and of course every Sunday they had a special event showing recycling and process and people's ideas, and to take that funding away and deprive a lot of people from that Time Festival was unbelievable.
Jeremy Baker, Cozy Homes Trust.
Is now joining.
25 years ago, I owned a milk run in Dunedin. I would sell about 800 bottles per day. That's a pretty average one with 600 households. No, sorry, 2,000 households. Those 800 bottles are equivalent to 60 litres, 300 2-litre plastic containers. And after 25 years, that's 2,737,500 plastic bottles going to landfill. 2,700,000, unbelievable. And the groups that push that through the farmers, the dairy farmers, and supermarkets, two of the worst polluters we can find now. Recycling plastics is only deferring the trip to the landfill. So even the stuff that does get recycled is going to get to landfill, and they're making more plastic now than they ever have. The wee plastic beads they manufacture things from. The only way to stop it is to stop it at its source. People don't want to use plastic. They're forced into it. You can't go to the supermarket and buy what you want without it being wrapped, whether it's a cucumber or blooming biscuits with wrapping and plastic trays in them. If you stuck a container outside the supermarket for people to put the plastic in, the supermarket would work with you to get rid of them. You have to be proactive, not attack an organisation like REAP. Okay, I'll leave that now. Colour exemptions. Now, this is another thing that council impose on people. That the reflective value of a house, it has to be around 30%, which is silly, because it means you're allowed to have a black roof, but not a white roof. And in summertime, in that roof space, it is very, very hot with a dark coloured roof. And insulation is working overtime trying to keep the house cool. You should learn from countries like Greece, where everything's white. Now, corrugated iron should be exempt because it's a diffuser of light. The light, angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. Now, if the light hits in the valley of the ridge, it will reflect at the same angle. But if it hits the side of the corrugation, it shoots off on a 45-degree angle if it was hitting in that plane angle. So the angle of reflection is still the same, but the plane's changed. So therefore, corrugation is diffusing light and should not have the same color code requirements. And it's silly. The color code requirements are silly anyway. And the other thing I may have touched on in that is north-facing properties. It's not really a council problem, but it could be made better if the council put it on the limb maybe, or I don't know if that's possible, or on all advertising that the property is a north facing and suitable for solar panels, because solar panels are now at 29 cents or what, cheap as chips, and the future is every house will have one, just like they'll have an electric car. In the UK, petrol and diesel is going to be banned in 15 years. 15 years is very close. Norway, 60% electric. And they're now working on vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, and now just recently vehicle to anything. And they just call it V2X, vehicle to anything. So that means people in an electric car would say 40 kilowatts, which is equivalent to about 4 of the power walls. They've got it sitting in their garage doing nothing other than being charged when it could be linked to the grid and will be in future. And so therefore the value of properties are going to increase with roofs that face the north. And like Alexandra's got streets like Royal Terrace, it's perfectly aligned, but the sections are all 90 degrees out of shape because they're long and skinny when it should be the other way. Now back in the day they didn't know about photovoltaics, but future subdivisions should be set up in such a way as that people have the ability to put a roof on their houses the correct way. I know some won't, but that's how it is. That's about all I got to say. Hope that all went through all right.
No, absolutely did. We could hear you very clearly, Colin. And thank you for all of that. Unfortunately, the 10 minutes is now up, so I don't have time for questions. I can tell you some work has been done in relation to the heat from the river, but I'll write you a letter and let you know about that and some other things from your submission. So thank you very much for your time. We greatly appreciate your effort.
Yeah, cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we now have Jeremy Baker from the Cozy Homes Trust. Jeremy, we should just have a wee interruption as Colin's called leaves.
+6427 4287 527
Right.
is now exiting.
Okay.
Here we go. We've got that out the way. So welcome, Jeremy. The councillors have read your submission and just standing by for you to speak to it or answer any questions. The next 10 minutes is all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning, councillors. Again, I'm Jeremy Baker. I am a resident of Dunedin, but I'm here in my capacity as the manager of the Cozy Homes Charitable Trust. And at Cozy Homes, we work across Otago towards our goal of making all houses in the region warm and cozy. I want to acknowledge that our written submission was drafted pre-lockdown. And of course, the impacts of the current situation on housing are still evolving. But I think we can agree that in the current environment, ensuring that everybody has a healthy home is more important now than ever. You'll all be familiar with the 2019 Southern District Health Board report on housing in Central Otago. And while the pressure on housing availability may be relieved at least temporarily, the housing quality issues highlighted in the report may become even more pressing due to the economic pressures and other factors resulting from the COVID response. So this includes people that are living in inadequately heated and insulated properties, in some cases dealing with cold and mold impacting negatively upon their health. Well, alternatively, we've got people struggling to pay to heat their property with inefficient heating appliances in drafty homes. We certainly applaud Council's investment in upgrading its housing for older people, but we also ask that you look at ways to enable and empower the broader community to make their homes warmer, drier, healthier, and more energy efficient. In the current environment, making sure people can be healthy and comfortable in their homes has really risen to the level of an essential service as we've asked people to spend more time at home to protect their health and public health. Now, two proven cost-effective programs for doing just that are highlighted in some detail in the written submission, and that's employing an eco-design advisor and adopting a voluntary targeted rate for insulation and heating. I won't go through all the details in our submission, but just briefly, the eco-design advisor service offers free, objective advice to residents on how to keep their home comfortable and energy efficient. And this can include no-cost tips that people can implement right away, or it could be information and recommendations to inform a significant renovation or even a new build, because we know that the current New Zealand building code is not sufficient, particularly for Central Otago conditions. The Eco Design Advisor Service is a well-developed national program. A number of other councils around the country have adopted this. And I can say from our experience in Dunedin that the program is working well here. The second program I want to mention today is the Voluntary Targeted Rates Program, or VTR, to allow homeowners to finance heating and insulation upgrades as an add-on to their rates. Dunedin and Clutha have these in place, and they've been used by hundreds of households in recent years to upgrade their homes. These programs are cost neutral to council, and the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority offers free support in setting one up. If council is interested in adding either an eco-design advisor or a voluntary targeted rates program, Cozy Homes would welcome the opportunity to be a resource to you in developing these programs. I just want to close today by saying that Cozy Homes sees the opportunity for a significant housing component as part of an infrastructure-led recovery, and we would welcome the opportunity to partner with council on local or potentially Otago-wide initiatives. And if we're able to use this opportunity to improve Central Otago's housing stock, we'll be positioned to be a much more resilient community in the face of future challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. It's great work that the Cozy Homes Trust does. And of course, we had our colleague, I guess you'd call him, Dave Cull, as your chair. And I think now Marion Paul from Arrowtown's taken over the chair. So there's always been a good connection with the trust. Deputy Mayor Gillespie has a question for you.
Yeah, Jeremy, Neil Gillespie here. Your comment about Clutha District and Dunedin City having the targeted rate facility, is that a current rate or was it a previous rate?
That's a current rate. And again, it's a voluntary program where people can opt in to finance heating and insulation upgrades and then pay those off over time at a reasonable interest rate along with their rates. And so, yes, Clutha and Dunedin both currently have operational programs.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just a supplementary to that one, Jeremy, are they available to homeowners as well as landlords? So are they used for investment properties as well?
Yes, that's right. As opposed to, for example, the subsidies that are available currently through the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, which are not open to landlords, these VTR programs can be used by landlords.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And Neil, you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, it just it occurred to me when you asked your question, Tim. I'm assuming, Jeremy, then that all the costs of that scheme are met by the users, basically. So there's no cost to the other ratepayers of the district to provide any subsidy or whatever to those people that use that targeted rate.
Exactly. That's the intent, that it's cost neutral to council and that the program funds itself. That's right. And there's no other cost to other ratepayers.
Thank you.
Yep.
Stu Duncan has a question, Jeremy.
Sure. Sure.
I think you're still on mute, Stu.
Sorry. A question for you, Jeremy, is the heating of houses now is so reliant on electricity. We've driven out the use of fires for pollution. And in small rural communities like Central Otago, we've got a lot of aged population, especially Naseby. We've had people talking about Naseby. They're retiring from Dunedin coming up there. 1908, there was 8 feet of snow in Naseby. There wouldn't be a power line that survived. There wouldn't be a system to get to Naseby because we haven't got fires anymore to keep your houses warm. I'm not sure that it's going to be that easy to get to rural communities to heat them up in a lot of the small towns. How do we start that process?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's going to be, in terms of upgrading our electricity infrastructure for, sort of the move to electrifying everything, that's going to be obviously a bit of a process to build additional resilience into our grid. There are the ultra-low emission burners available now, and those are certainly appropriate in many locations as well. I understand the need for resilience. And there's also things that can be done regarding building resilience into the local grid. And some of that might be beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here today. But nonetheless, as you mentioned, people will become more and more reliant on electrical infrastructure. So we've got to improve the reliability thereof. But at the current time, low emission burners certainly have a place as well, and would be eligible, for all of the subsidy programs and targeted rate programs and things like that we're advocating for.
I get extremely nervous when I hear of, and I totally agree, Stu, there is a push to get rid of the wood burners, but we've already had a councillor today have to leave home to go to another place to attend this meeting because the power went out. So, it can get awfully cold here. It's about, 3 degrees outside at the moment. And if you're relying on electricity, you might be in for a chilly day.
Yep, I understand the challenges there.
All right, I don't see any other questions coming up from the councillors. So Jeremy, keep up the good work that the Cozy Homes Trust does. It's not an organisation that I was familiar with before I came here, but it's one I've become familiar with, and I'm a very strong supporter of what you do. So all the best to your crew, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. Let us know when you're in the area next.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you. All right, councillors, that brings us to our first break. We've actually got a couple of minutes in the bank, so we'll use those for what needs to be done. So grab a cup of tea or whatever. Cheryl, it's great to see you back with us. And so I will be starting the meeting when the computer clock says 10:25. I'll be hitting the go button, so please make sure that you're back in time. Thank you, everybody.
+642768777517
is now joining.
Good morning, is it you, Greg?
Yeah, hi, Greg here.
It's Rebecca here. We're just taking a break. We're expecting others back in 2 minutes.
How many minutes, sorry?
2.
2 minutes, okay,
Yes.
great. Can you hear me okay? Am I
We
coming
can.
through all right?
We are.
Not too much echo? I've got you on speakerphone and I'm in an echoey room, but that's all right.
No, you're good as gold. We are streaming live, just so you know.
Good morning, Greg.
Okay.
Shirley here. You're coming through loud and clear.
Hi, thanks, Shirley. Hi, good morning to you.
Morning, Greg. It's Lindley here.
Lindley Claridge, hi. Good morning, Morena.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Just streaming, can you all see each other? I'm just on phones.
No, we've made it so we can't see each other as well, Greg, for a couple of reasons. It's Tim here, welcome. One, that it causes some of the rural connections if we all have video going. The other, if we can see each other and the submitters can't, where I felt, that probably isn't terribly fair. So we're all in the dark, so to speak. It's working well though.
All right. Is it?
Yeah, surprisingly.
Very good to be the way of the future.
Well, I don't know. I don't think you ever beat personal contact, but in terms of a backup plan, it's pretty darn good actually.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. As long as everyone's got their pants on.
Yes.
Well, it doesn't matter, does it?
It doesn't when you're on camera.
That's right.
When you're not on camera, rather. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Greg, partway or towards the end of your 10 minutes, you'll hear you'll hear Bill Godsall's voice say Bill Godsall and then has joined us. So just ignore that. It's just it's what it does when people come into the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gosh, have I got that long?
10 minutes, mate. Starting now. It's actually welcome back, everybody. It's 10:25, which was our time to reconvene. And our next submitter, you'll find the submission on page 206 of the agenda, is Greg Wilkinson. Greg, you can take it as read that we've read the submission, but you can speak to it, read it, take questions, whatever you would like to do over the next 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Right, wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Tim and Morena and Atamarie councillors. I guess to me there's a couple of issues here. I mean, I'm supporting the proposal that you've put forward. First, I guess, is the principle of do we fund future infrastructural development via debt funding or how best to fund that, and are we opposed or not to raising debt in order to do that? And the second part is then, well, if that's the case, then where do you get the money from? So personally, I have no objection to raising debt for funding future projects. You've obviously looked at this closely yourselves and come to that conclusion, or at least that's your proposal. You know, you've got a very strong balance sheet, and I think it's an opportunity to leverage off that. We shouldn't fear debt and nor the notion of saddling future generations by raising debt now. I mean, the future generations of ratepayers are going to be the ones that also benefit from these projects. So I think that it's only fair and equitable to share the cost. Secondly, you could argue that we could raise the money by other means of selling current assets. To me, what you're doing by that is depriving those future generations of the benefit of those assets if you sell them, because you only sell the farm or the family silver once. So, you know, my submission, as I've stated, is that I think I support the motion, or the proposal at least, to raise debt. The second part is then where do you get that money from? And from what I looked into, and thanks to councillors Gillespie and Calvert for the consultations that I had with them before I put my submission in. In those discussions, I looked into the website. Neil kindly sent me the link about that, and had a look at that website with the local government funding agency. And, you know, if you're going to get money from anywhere to fund development projects for future, then it makes sense to me that an agency that has been set up specifically for this task of lending money out to local government authorities, then it makes sense that that would be the one to get it from, because that's where you're going to get the most favourable terms. They're a very strong governance position too. It's an impressive board that they have on the LGFA when you look at it, including our own local Linda Robertson, who you'll be familiar with and is current chair of Central Lakes Trust. So very strong board, good governance, the ability to raise money or lend money at favourable terms. It just makes sense that that be the agency that you'll go to. You note at the end of my submission, I also put that perhaps you could look at becoming a shareholder. I don't think that's part of your proposal at this point, but or if you're in a position to invest, or what that actually entails. But it seems as 30 other local authorities around the country have seen fit to get on board and become shareholders in partnership with the government, and it's clear that there is also uncalled share allocation available too. So there's obviously extra capacity for them to take on shareholders. So I would encourage you to at least weigh up the merits of whether or not that's a good idea as well. But I know that's not part of your proposal, but just when I was looking at the LGFA, that struck me as being something at least worthy of looking into. So that's pretty much my submission. I'm happy to take questions or any discussion.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Greg. And those words of support to that proposal carry a fair bit of mana and weight. Councillor Gregg's been, I'm sure you're aware, a trustee of Central Lakes Trust for 9 years, finishing last year as 9 years is the maximum. But for 6 of those years, the last 6 was also on the investment subcommittee. And when you look at how Central Lakes Trust has performed in terms of looking after our nest egg, a lot of people think that the job is, speaking as a former trustee, the job is giving away the money, but that's not the job at all. The job is growing the money, and that investment committee had a large part in the great success that's been achieved. So some fairly good knowledge behind those statements. Councillors, any questions for Greg? I've intimidated them all now, Greg.
Just on your point that you raised there, Tim, talking about leveraging and my experience from the Central Lakes Trust Investment Committee, it is about leveraging your position. And indeed, as you'll know from your experience as well, that we were able to leverage money out of the government and out of other trusts for the current building projects of the cycleways and walkways that are currently under construction. Now that's about leveraging your position. Similar to about encouraging Pioneer Energy into leveraging their balance sheet and taking on debt, or where they can fund their projects from as well. So, I think the Central Otago District Council, thanks to the judicious and prudent management of our funds and financial position, is very strong now from previous councils and the current council. But where others have either shied away or not needed to call on debt funding for projects, I think we're at a pivotal time in our history. That,
is now joining.
Sorry, that's Bill, wasn't it?
Carry on, Greg.
We're in a position where we shouldn't shy away from the notion of taking on debt. It's not a bad thing.
Excellent.
You're in a strong position.
Councillor Stu Duncan had a comment.
Yeah, Greg, Stu here. Listen, looking forward in the next 20 or 30 years, should we be looking at debt funding and getting into joint ventures with what's the Central Lake Trust for major development things, e.g. irrigation dams or those sort of processes?
Do I see that as an opportunity, or something that's likely?
Well, do you see it's an opportunity we should be looking into as everyone's saying, the economists look at something, be broad, be brave. Are they issues as a council, which is pretty new territory for council, other than North Otago lent money to an irrigation companies? Should we be thinking like that?
Potentially, although I'm also, and again, I'm a former trustee of Central Lakes Trust, so I can't speak with any authority on their behalf, but there has been proposals in the past from specifically irrigation companies to fund, which were declined. I mean, they're hamstrung to a point because they can only fund charitable works, charitable projects. But there is, that's where Pioneer Energy is the golden goose, because whilst they're also tax exempt as well, they perhaps have a bit more freedom, especially where it's investments and partnerships and joint ventures. They have a lot of experience in that. And you look at Dairy Creek development, where that was a proposal to Central Lakes Trust that was then channeled through Pioneer, and so Pioneer were able to get involved with that one. But as for other irrigation projects, then that's, I don't know that it's a matter for Central Lakes Trust, but it might be for Pioneer, because they do, pumps and pipes and water is their gig. But of course, it's got to meet all those other business imperatives as well, possibly.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Stu. Nobody else is indicating a question, Greg, so thank you very much for your well thought through submission, and nice to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. It's thank you for the opportunity to be part of it. Cheers.
Pleasure. Cheers, Greg.
Nā te wā. Kia kite.
And Bill will join
Greg
you shortly.
Wilkinson
is now exiting.
We'll just wait for that voice saying that Greg has exited, and you will also hear toward the end of your submission David Cooper's voice saying he's joined, so don't let that put you off your stride. Welcome, Bill. You're going to be speaking to John's submission, which councillors is on page 209 from Sport Otago. So Bill, the next 10 minutes is yours, however you care to use it. Should you wish to speak to the submission, ask questions, or just however you wish to proceed. It's entirely in your hands, but the floor is yours now.
Thank you, and thanks, guys, for the opportunity to speak as well. I guess all I've got to say really is a big thank you for you guys supporting the Sport Central model. It was the first regional office set up in the country, and it's been, I believe, extremely successful, and it's had a lot of wins throughout its time. It's nearly 19 years now. And we appreciate the fact that you guys have funded it all of that time, and also provided office in Cromwell, and the new office at the Cromwell Swim Centre is fit for use. It's perfect, in fact. So we are asking again, I guess, just for a continuation of that financial support, so we can go about doing the things for sport and recreation in Central Otago. John has asked me to talk to you guys a little bit about a sport and recreation relief. And I guess all that is waiving, or looking at waiving, some of the charges and leases and rents that some of the sporting codes may incur over the coming 12 months. John's predicting it's going to be a little bit harder for sporting groups right around the region. So any help, I guess, without putting yourselves in financial risk would be much appreciated. And I think the other big thing that you guys help us out with is Central Otago Swim to Survive program, which is run through all your pools and all the schools, where each student gets 10 free swims a year to learn the skills to keep them alive in the water. And I know it costs you guys money, and we really appreciate that, because I think that's really, really important, especially in our region. We haven't had any fatalities with children swimming in long, may that last. And I think that's part of the reason why. So yeah, that's about all I guess I've got to say. But did anybody have any questions? It's pretty trying times in sport at the moment, and we're all sort of trying to guess where it's heading and what's going to happen over the next few months leading into Christmas.
Yeah, I'll start the ball rolling, Bill. It's Tim here. Just when you say about, and couldn't support particularly kids sport, youth sport, and anyone's sport more, but when we look at, and I guess it's a broader question of what council has to look at, if we were to say, well, we're going to cut the costs, because, to say maintain Molyneux Park, it costs money. So if we're going to say all use of Molyneux Park's free, then that cost falls on everybody, where that's to the benefit of everyone, whereas there may be some who simply can't, a kid who can't play sport because they can't afford the subs, and we're not better to find a way, and who the us is, and that is whether it's council or Sports Central or the schools or whatever, to actually ensure that those kids have the support, the ones who can't afford it, as opposed to doing an across the board thing where it benefits everyone, no matter what the pandemic's caused to your family's financial situation.
Yeah, personally, I totally agree. I think there are other funds out there that are available to sporting codes as well. So we're not just relying on you guys. And I guess that's why I said, if you can afford it, to see some rates released to these guys. But the Resilience Fund put out by Sport New Zealand will cover some of the costs for sporting codes. And there will always be children, regardless, that can't afford to play sport. And Sport New Zealand are going down a slightly new direction, starting at the end of when all of this pandemic stuff sort of runs out. And they're going to look at a slightly different model where they call it sport, play and active recreation. So where they've been concentrating very heavily on just sport, they're now going to look at play and active recreation. So they're generally the activities like mountain biking and not belonging to a club, some event stuff, and just physical activity in general. And that's where we hope these children who, and adults as well, that can't afford to join a club or have no wish to join a club, can get collected and at least be out there being active, not being such a burden on the health system.
That sounds like a good direction. Martin, you've got a question or a comment?
Martin McPherson. Tim, you summed it up quite well. I'm already coming under some lobbying pressure from one or two codes to reduce fees for and hire charges for facilities. And if we go down that path, somebody else has to pick up that bill. And that's what I'm aware of. And I'm pleased to hear that you, as Sports Central, are aware that if we do shave off costs for individual codes, somebody has to pick up that. And whether that is fair on non-sport playing ratepayers, well, that's a debate for a later date. But I'm pleased to hear that you generally do concur with that thinking.
Yeah, I think the CODC region, like you guys look after your codes particularly well, and we've got a nice, steady, stable population, whereas in the Queenstown region, where the council try to gather quite a bit more revenue from their codes, user pays, and I understand that, and some of those clubs are going to struggle a little bit because they've lost a lot of members as well. It's not going to impact, in my opinion, whether people start to play sport or not. And I think they would be much more appreciative of a good facility, a well-maintained and well-kept and clean facility than seeing the rates probably taken away. So I don't see that as the biggest problem we've got at the moment, to be fair. I think that some of the codes need to be just controlled a little bit more as our problem around how many children or how many players are going to be on and about fields while we're getting through this. I would hate to see 800 or 1,000 kids playing soccer or ripper rugby on a Saturday morning straight up. I think we need to look at playing within our own backyard and then look at a wider Central Otago competition when things are settled down quite a bit more. We're heading on a nice track, but it would be a real shame to see us go backwards. Especially, I don't want to see sport being the catalyst for us going backwards.
Bill, it's Tim here again. What do you think the impact's going to be on sport locally with the poker machine funding was already dropping away, the bars being closed for 2 months, and then one imagines somewhat restricted after that, just in the number of people goings, and on top of that, people with less money to pump into the pokies, or hopefully aren't pumping them in. Is that going to be a big effect on sports locally, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of sports rely on pub charity, I guess you could call it. It is a big problem. It's going to be a big problem. It's going to be a bigger problem for the national sporting organisations and the regional sporting organisations, and actually at club level. We have clubs in Central Otago that are pretty innovative in how to survive and earn money, and I know through a lot of the events that we run, we get a lot of the clubs actually coming and volunteering. Well, we call it volunteering, but we actually pay for their services. So there are other ways for them to gain money, and to be fair, unless your code owns its own facility or is paying a development officer or paying administrators, there's not a hell of a lot of cost involved in maintaining local level sport. It's when you start travelling outside of your region or want to take a rugby team to Australia or somewhere like that. It is going to be hard. There's no two ways about it, but sport will survive. I think people have been pretty innovative. I see some of our clubs' financials from time to time, and a lot of our clubs are in good stead. And as long as they don't own their own facilities and have incurring all of these costs associated with maintaining and upgrading buildings and facilities, then we'll be fine.
We might find that with restrictions on international travel, some of the big, top line sports bodies, NZRFU and so forth, might look a bit more down to the grassroots level because they don't have to pump as much money into the top team because they're not doing anything. Yeah, I agree. I think professional sport in New Zealand has to be handled with kids' gloves, like especially we've moved into, and quite rightly so, into the women's professional codes now. They're getting paid for playing their sport, which is great, but it's incurred a lot of extra cost on sport straight up in the first 2 or 3 years now. I think that's probably some of the problem with some of the netball clubs or areas really struggling, but they will survive. And Sport New Zealand and the government will prop them up without a doubt. That Resilience Fund hasn't been oversubscribed yet, but those are the codes that can pick up $40,000 in one hit. So hopefully that gets them through this tight time as well. There's money out there. It's just we need to make sure that the clubs understand where to get it, and that's a big part that we play in the region at the moment. Excellent. All right, councillors, any other questions for Bill? I know we've got some spare time up our sleeves. David Cooper not due to join us to 10:50 by this, but Bill will have places to go if there are no further questions. No. All right, Bill, keep up the good work. Sports Central does fantastic things in our community, and you're an absolute legend in the way you get around the place and set things up and make them happen. So stick with it, keep it up, because those are the things that we've got to be grateful for around our district, that we've got the facilities, we've got a sports-minded community, and we've just got to keep people active. And certainly, I don't know about you, but I've never seen so many people of a certain age wobbling on push bikes as I have through the term of the pandemic. Although they were wobbling at the start, but they were absolutely zooming by the end of it. And I think it's been great seeing so many people out and about. Yes, I think people have learned one or two things, and one is that your health and getting out and doing some exercise is very, very important, and also that maybe we have been on that big wave of spending way too much time working and not enough time recreating and getting out there and smiling and enjoying each other. So yeah, no, it's been pretty. And we have a great team of people in Central Otago behind sport and Sport Central, so we appreciate that as well. And you guys are a big part of that. So thank you guys, and I'll sign off. Well, just a moment. Stephen Jeffries just popped up that he's got a question. So Stephen, we do have time for another one. Okay, cool.
Hi, Bill. Stephen Jeffrey. So yeah, I was going to ask this, and I thought, no, I'll just go for now. I still have some concerns about all the travelling that our local communities have to do for sports with their children, and how far they're going to practices even. And the centralisation of facilities is probably a way that we could address that going forward. I have talked about it before. What are your thoughts on that?
The biggest problem we have with, and why a lot of the codes like rugby have to travel so much, and I guess we might be talking rugby here, I assume, is because of the player numbers. And that comes back to what Tim was saying.
Is now joining.
That at the top end of sport, there's been way too many dollars and efforts put towards our top players and not the grassroots. But if we get back to grassroots, get more numbers involved, then we won't have to travel so far. We'll be able to have local competition. It's just a numbers game on people, I believe, Stephen. But as far as the school stuff done, that new implementing the new zone system, which I introduced to the primary schools 2 years ago now, means they are all playing locally. Zones are playing locally, and then they're coming together and having a Central Otago competition. And the school kids are not now travelling to Dunedin for their competition, because we have enough students here to have a great and meaningful competition in just about all codes. So when we can get more people playing sport, Stephen, I think the need to travel outside of the region will be less. But we shouldn't forget that a lot of those codes choose to travel outside of the region on their own bat. I know rugby, junior rugby, have teams going to Australia just about every year to play rugby, and I question some of those codes why they do that. And one of the answers I got was it's the only way we can keep the kids playing rugby for the whole season is because they can then get to have the cherry as a trip to Australia at the end of the year. So there are a whole lot of reasons why that happens. I agree entirely with what you're saying. If we can cut down that travel outside of the region, that would be great. But and while I've got you there, Stephen, I would just like to congratulate you guys on your track that you're putting in around the Cromwell area and down the gorge. It's looking pretty swish, and you could not have got your timing better. It was like Grand Central Station, to be fair, going up and down those tracks. So they've got good use, and that money has certainly been, that's a really good spend. That'll keep people in the district if we can get them on that track, eh?
Agree. Yep. Thanks, Bill.
It's looking very exciting, that track. I can't wait for it to open. All right, Bill, thanks very much for your time. And as I said earlier on, keep up the great work at Sports Central. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. See ya.
And our final submitter today has joined us, David Cooper from Federated Farmers. You'll find a very full submission on page 242 of the agenda.
Is now exiting.
So, David, welcome. The floor is yours for the next 10 minutes to either speak to your submission or give an overview or take questions or however you'd like to handle it. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Worship. And the submission's a little shorter than most years. It's, I think that hopefully that means less work for you as a council. Just want to start off by congratulating Council for the efforts you're going to review spending. I was looking at your May 6th media release and the extensive work you're going to reduce some of that spending. Obviously, Council can't take a slash and burn approach. There'll be some areas where if you don't invest this year, you'll have to invest later on, for example, infrastructure, etc. But the steps you're taking, looking at proposed spending, looking at other financial mechanisms, debt, for example, deferring some spending is really welcome. Particularly, it's a very strong signal to the community that you understand what they're going through. As you'll know, as a result of the revaluations, farmers' rates are reducing significantly. We were haranguing Council for the farmers' rates going up. I think it was 3 years ago or 6 years ago. So farmers' rates are going down this year. So they don't have really, farmers won't be impacted as much as the general population by any rates increases or by any rate savings. But in our view, it really does highlight the need to relook at some of those property value-based rates, because as you're well aware, those people whose rates are going up will not be suddenly looking at huge amounts of income. It's simply that their property values have shifted up, and that's a year or two out of date. Finally, we support the proposal to participate in the LGFA scheme, even though interest rates are low at the moment. It's a good example or good opportunity to have some well-backed borrowing capacity into the future. And that's our submission.
That's the Reader's Digest version. Thank you very much. Councillors, questions of Federated Farmers, questions of David. Gosh.
I'll get off too easy.
I think you are. I don't know. Here's Deputy Mayor Gillespie has a question for you.
Hello, David. Neil Gillespie here.
Good, Neil.
I guess the opportunity in particular for our rate funding policy is something we're going to be working on as we head in towards the LTP. So I think today we're not going to be able to do anything about the funding policy and how it works. Don't disagree with you at all that going forward we need to find the better balance that doesn't leave us so exposed to wild changes in valuation. So there's either two ways of doing that. We find a policy that works, and I don't know that anybody's got the golden bullet yet, but you might have one by the time we have to do it. Otherwise, we stop clapping ourselves on the back for getting the benefits of our valuations going up every 3 years and the tension that causes in the rating area. But take on board your comments about finding a better way to soften that. It may be that the best way to do it is to find ways to review our revenue and financing policy in between, rather than waiting for the long-term plan as well.
Yes, it is a tough one, and certainly appreciate you can't do anything this year, but we'd be happy to be involved in any conversation on that. And there may be options, like the only thing I can think of, it's a hammer to crack a walnut, but things like differentials that you could look at. But yeah, I certainly appreciate there's no silver bullet answer.
Yeah, no, thank you. And as always, Fed's submission is very thought provoking, and thank you for your support of what we are trying to do.
So I think it's fantastic. I just really can't state that enough. I think the work you're doing, looking at reviewing spending and also communicating with the community is just exemplary.
There's a few people I'd like to pass that on to, David. Actually, can I give you a list of their names? We've got the beauty of being able to see all the councils at once, so I can point them in the direction of some councils who aren't doing quite as well.
Best we don't name names. We'll take that as a win, David. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much for your time. Great.
Thank you.
Greatly
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Worship.
Thank you, David. Councillors, we'll just wait for David's exit voice.
David Cooper.
Is now exiting.
All right, so that's all our submitters today. Thank you very much for the way that was handled, because it was all new to us, and I think it went really without a hitch, which is great. So we're ahead of schedule, which is also a good thing. I like it when we're ahead of schedule. So we're now on page 25 of our agenda, which is the annual plan presentation. Sanch is going to speak to us, and then Jotham and Leanne will be taking us through that presentation. So Sanch, here, over to staff, really.
Yeah, good morning, Your Worship and councillors. It's a little unusual perhaps that I would start off with an annual plan paper when we have our capable staff behind us to do it, but I wanted to front end our discussion today given the unprecedented times that we've found ourselves in. And I think we all accept the last time we discussed the proposed annual plan, between then and now the world has turned on its axis completely. Today's staff are going to present to you a suite of reports that will enable us, we believe, to deliver an annual plan that is considerably different to the already no frills one that you signed off on for consultation prior to COVID-19, but that still keeps the council moving at a time when the council definitely needs to keep moving. Without a doubt, these deliberations today require strategic thinking and really strong leadership. And we've listened to economists who describe the current situation as a once in a 100-year event. So it's really massive. And there is a lot of political pressure on you, I know, to make decisions that are in the best interest of Central Otago, rightfully so. But I don't envy your role in such trying times. And I thank you for giving due consideration to staff advice as you make your decisions today. What staff are going to put to you is a culmination of our thinking over the course of the COVID-19 event so far. Where we first started is not where we've now landed. So it's been such a dynamic situation, and the fullness of time has allowed our thinking to develop. We've worked really hard, researched hard, spoken to other councils, listened to economists, listened to central government, and applied all of that thinking to the specifics of our own place here in Central Otago. We've tried to be evidence-based in our thinking so that you can be evidence-based in your decision-making. We don't doubt that COVID-19 will have a big impact on Central Otago, both our economy and on our community's sense of well-being, in fact, actual well-being. But we are luckier than some, and we only need to look to our immediate neighbour to see that. So far, despite the reported steep percentage increases in unemployment in Central Otago, the actual numbers are relatively low. But unemployment is likely to grow, possibly to unprecedented levels for us. In the face of that environment, there's going to be a lot of pressure on council. So we need to get really clear on what our goals are and make the decisions that help us to achieve it. And that is tough in an environment where the levels of community and possibly business confidence are going to be lower. However, we've worked to provide advice today that shows that we stand in solidarity with our community, but that keeps funds free for council to do things it will need to do to stimulate our economy. So, as both central government and New Zealand economists have strongly advised, we're going to present a proposed budget today that avoids austerity, something that previous recessions has shown us has actually a large negative impact on the economy and people in the community. The pathway that we're going to present today ensures we remain committed to capital spend and positions us to accelerate capital expenditure as a co-investment partner with central government, something that they have been very clear about, telling councils that if they aren't in a position to co-invest because they've gone too far down a pathway of austerity, that they will be on their own. And in that regard, this once in a 100-year event may in fact also be a once in a 100-year opportunity. But we provide avenues, in saying that, we do provide avenues for rates relief that is targeted, and we definitely share in the direction we've had from the Executive Committee and from private conversations with elected members that we need to help those that need it most. We propose that we continue on the path to join the local government funding agency so that we have the ability to externally borrow, knowing that for every dollar we spend on interest payments, we create roughly 20 times more jobs for that same dollar spent in rates relief. And I know that you've mentioned this morning that you've listened to the webinar from Shamabil Yaqub, where he states that $1 million of rates relief supports 8.5 jobs, but $1 million in interest payments for capital investment supports 155 jobs. That is compelling, but it is also a balancing act. And so we've tried our best to think locally so that we can act locally. We understand the fears and the challenges that people in Central Otago are facing, and our own families here at Council are not immune from those same fears and challenges. So our advice today tries to be specific in that it does not try to be all things to all people, but it is targeted and complements those existing avenues and tools that central government has provided through MSD, the IRD and other agencies like NZTE. As mentioned earlier, when we started on the COVID-19 journey, our initial reaction was that the Council should try and reduce rates as much as possible for everyone. Over time, and in listening to the experts and signals from central government, staff position has shifted. We have come to the view that providing a small amount of relief to everyone doesn't really help anyone. More than 2 million New Zealanders will continue to be employed through this crisis, recession, depression, whatever it becomes. And I certainly hope that I'm one of them. If I am, then I can afford to pay my rates. For those that are most impacted by the economic downturn of COVID-19, it won't just be the increase they can't afford, it's actually going to be their rates full stop. It is those people that will most need our help. In addition to budget figures, there's other roles that Council will need to play, in particular around coordinating soft networks, helping with welfare. And we're well positioned to take those to take that role in our community, and all of the work that we bring to you in the coming months will be looking at what Council's role is in helping us get through this crisis. But to summarise what I've said for the topic of the annual plan today, our advice for your consideration is a package that recommends a continued capital program, giving us the opportunity to externally borrow so that we can make sure we are driving economic growth and employment for Central Otago, leveraging our balance sheet as an opportunity to do things like co-invest with central government, and rates relief that is generous and targeted to those that most need it. Our advice is based on an approach that we believe will provide the best long-term outcomes for this incredible place that we live. Before I hand over to Leanne McDonald and Jotham Kasabanti, I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that those two people in particular, but many other staff as well, have put into reworking a budget that had already taken months of work to achieve. It's been an overwhelming task and everyone has approached it with absolute integrity and goodwill. But it has been a mountain of reworking many things. So you might have a lot of questions and we might need to clarify a few things for you today, and we'll try our best to do that as we go through. So I'll hand over to Leanne and Jotham to go through the suite of reports, and thank you again for just bearing with us as we go through those considerations and you make your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanchia.
Good morning, everyone. This is Leanne McDonald. Firstly, thank you, Sanchia, and I'd also like to acknowledge Jotham and the finance team and many other staff who've been involved in helping us rework this budget that we're going to talk about throughout the day. I'm going to do my best now to share, I'm hoping, my PowerPoint presentation. Can that be seen?
Getting the full screen, Leanne, if you're able to start the slideshow, we should get the individual slides. Oops.
Nope, that didn't do it. Bear with me.
Click the little screen down the bottom, Leanne, down the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. There's a little screen down there. Can you see it?
Unfortunately, the live thing's hiding it. So if there is that one,
over, keep going. 1, 2, 3 more.
I can't see them because the little. Hang on a minute. Sorry, I had the little picture in the way.
One more.
That one.
One more.
There we go. Beauty.
Happy?
Let's see if it works.
That one.
No, just lost it altogether.
No, it's there, Liam.
Okay, cool. Right. Okay. Apologies. So I just want to talk briefly about where we started, and Sanch has given a really good overview and a start from what's happened since February, March. So we went out to consultation back in March, and we went out with very much a no-frills budget. Our average rates increase was 4.9%, in fact it was nearly 4.99%. We had challenges with valuations, and we've heard about that from one of our speakers this morning, particularly around rural versus urban. We have a variation of targeted rates impact across the wards. We faced increased costs, particularly around our water, wastewater and waste minimisation, and we also faced government unfunded mandates, and they were out of our control. We also faced growth across the district, but again, variances across the wards. And then we hit COVID-19. Initially, there was a lot of panic. There was companies closing, there was huge comments around job losses, and we know we're still going to see some of that impact. There were displaced families. We had our own EOC kick in with significant welfare support, and that happened around New Zealand. We were fortunate in that government stepped in with a number of solutions to help manage the pain, particularly for our commercial world around wage subsidies, but they also helped with our residential, with our everyday people, with the minimum wage, benefit increases, the heating subsidy increasing, so that they help spread or mitigate some of the pain. But we still face that widespread concern, and we've heard throughout the media a number of councils promising zero rate increases. We've heard feedback, including today, from the community supporting this. We've met with the executive committee, also supporting a zero rates increase. I guess the challenge we've got is the immediate help versus future thinking. And for us, you know, we've already looked at some of the immediate help around our instalment 4 of our rates invoice that we had to send out. We've talked around penalties and even looking forward to how we look at the future of our interest that we charge on penalties. So with instalment 4, we looked at trying to delay sending it out, and we looked at trying to change and not apply penalties, both things through legal advice that the councils took collectively across New Zealand we couldn't do. We couldn't just rewrite or introduce a whole new remission policy either. Fortunately, we could amend a policy that we already had to remit penalties. So we've been able to apply that to help our community right now for this current year. Management also reviewed the budgets to achieve the average nil base rates increase, and we've looked at our healthy balance sheet, and we're really fortunate in that we do have a healthy balance sheet. We looked at reserve funding and carry forwards, postponing of minor works, reviewing the total amount of grants available and spreading the costs differently. Recognising we'd already been out to our community and consulted with them on what we were planning to do, which was pretty much a no-frills budget, achieving what we'd set out to do for year 3 of the long-term plan. So later you're going to see the end result of that when you go through our paper. But I guess the question really comes down to, is a zero budget really a zero budget? I'm just going to hand to Jotham for a moment to talk around what goes on with our ward targeted rates and our other rates that we face.
Hello, Jotham here. So last week, from Monday through Thursday, we presented to the community boards what their rate income looks like. This is simply a representation of the rates 2019-20 versus 2021, and comparison to the different wards. As you can see, these new numbers are based on all the work that staff did in trying to bring the rates down as much as they can. Like Leanne mentioned, using reserves, postponing some of the work that we had scheduled for next financial year, and also using carry forwards to fund some of the work that we anticipate to do next financial year. And then on the next slide is the same slide, but we have included the general rates and district-wide rates, and these are rates paid by every ratepayer in Central Otago. Our general rates had a huge drop, and this is mainly because of depreciation and also how we are funding our roading. Then the district-wide rates, those are mainly impacted by government mandates, and then an increase in some of our costs, like water costs and waste minimalization costs. I'll hand over to Leanne. Yep, so yes, the next slide is just a representation of what I had talked about in the previous slide, just showing the different rating types and how they've been impacted. So CV stands for capital value, and we usually base our capital planning, economic development, works and public toilets are based on capital value. So you can see there's a slight increase of 748. That's comparing 2019 to 2020-21. So this financial year to next financial year. The next is general rates and ward works and services, and that had a big decrease just because most of the most of the rates that are based on land value are the rural areas, and we saw that because of depreciation, a lot of that rates income came down. Then you have rate types that are based on rating unit, and those that are based on connection, and those the rate in income came up with those two types. If we move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Jotham. So going back to the challenge of a zero rates increase, you can see how there's so many moving factors that impact on getting a zero rate, and there's no way that we can, I guess, play God and make it zero for everybody without completely breaching our revenue and funding policies. We've heard from a number of people who've looked at the webinars that we've all, particularly the one from Shamil. We've done a lot of research, we've listened to the government messages, we've listened to SOLGAN messaging, legal advice across our councils about what we can and what we cannot do. What we do know is austerity is not the answer. We know we've got to keep on doing the work that we've committed to doing, not just to keep our community viable, but also to keep our community employed. So we need to keep doing what we said we would do. We also need to think carefully about the use of reserves, because as much as they are there for a rainy day, and I'm the first to acknowledge that right now we're in a rainy day, we also need to have the reserves there to collaborate, to take up any opportunities that are presented to us, such as the shovel ready programs that we've put forward. But there'll be, I believe, a number of opportunities like that where we can collaborate with the commercial sector, the government sector, and a number of others to keep promoting our council's work. We need to keep maintaining a healthy balance sheet, but we also need to be thinking of the future and not just now, not just today. Where we use reserves, we run the risk of creating a bow wave in 12 months' time. We need to acknowledge that inflation and growth are a factor, and we can't mask those. And we still have to achieve the levels of service. They're a must. We can't not do our waste or our rubbish. They're tasks that council must achieve. I also realise that zero rates increase does not equal zero rates increase across councils. We think it does, but actually it doesn't. Many of the times when I heard somebody announce that they had a zero rates increase, I would try and get hold of my counterpart to see if they really meant a zero rates income increase or an average rates increase. And generally, particularly in the areas where there's high growth, a zero rates increase meant an average zero rates increase as opposed to an income increase. We also know that not everyone's impacted like with like. And Sanchi referred to that in her opening conversation this morning. A zero rates increase may not be the true way forward. We can't play favourites. You know, you hear people ask us to get rid of the impact of the new valuations. We actually looked at that. Councils across New Zealand looked to see if we could ignore this year's valuations to try and mitigate some of those huge changes in rates increase as a result of those valuations. We weren't legally able to do that. We had to operate within our existing policies, including our rating and funding policy. We did review our existing remission policies. We do believe that we can help a few really well, but I do not see how we can help everybody even a little. So again, I'm going to reiterate that I hope that we can think of the bow wave when deliberating. Jotham's spoken how the community boards have reviewed their budgets, and other than a minor amendment from Cromwell and a minor amendment from Teviot Valley, they were on the whole accepted, which was really good. So right now we're here on the 18th of May, and shortly you'll start your deliberations where you've heard from your community and you've got a lot of written submissions also from your community. And we will also talk about how we can make the budget work to try and achieve the best result we can while still meeting the work that we're committed to doing. Council will also be asked to consider the remission policy for extreme financial hardship. This policy already existed. It's been in our long-term plans and annual plans for a number of years. What I did do, in line with another number of other councils, was make sure the criteria was specific so that it is very, I guess, rules-based or principle-based. When people apply, it's easy to demonstrate that everybody is treated fairly and the same. We also did a review of the disaster recovery reserve because it was something actually I can be hand on heart, wasn't aware existed, and it was good to review when it started and its purpose, and that will be brought to you today as well. And then of course we've got the submissions. And when we consider that annual plan, the 2020-21 annual plan, we need to be thinking about the community now and in the future. And one of the things I think we would like to talk about during that presentation is penalties and the role of penalties for the next 12 months. Maintaining a healthy balance sheet is going to be important. Minimising the bow wave effect where we can, and obviously considering the community board requests. And then going back to the question, what does a zero rates increase really mean? So that's me for today, for this part anyway, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Leanne. The first question I'd have for you, and it is much for anybody listening in as more so for them perhaps than the councillors. You've discussed the bow wave on a couple of occasions. Can you perhaps just give a brief summary of what the bow wave is and why we have to be so cautious of it?
Certainly. So it's easy to reserve fund a one-off activity that is not going to pop up again the following year. But when we go through the paper later to show how we've tried to achieve an average nil rates increase, One of the things we've proposed from our earlier days when we were all still reacting was to use reserve funds to offset some of the significant increases in our water, our wastewater and our waste minimisation. They were significant increases, and so we proposed at the time to use $1 million of reserves to offset that impact, to try and help our ratepayers not feel the pain. The reality is that's business as usual, and those costs will still be there next year or in the following year, and they will continue to grow because it's an area that we can't control, and it's also an area that will be impacted by inflation as we go along. So while we will save our ratepayers $1 million today, they will then feel that cost next year, plus the accumulation of the following year's increases. So it will hurt them equally. All we're doing is delaying the pain. And in 12 months' time, they may not remember exactly where they were today, and they certainly may not remember that we saved that pain today. So it kind of becomes a double-edged sword. It's a very short-term win, but not a long-term. We don't really solve the war.
So I guess, and these numbers mean absolutely nothing. I'm making them up. But if the increased costs of our waste minimisation, for instance, are 4%, and we just we reserve fund that this year, then next year they've gone up another 4% because the costs of that are likely to go up. And again, I emphasise I'm making that number up. In effect, next year it'll be going up 8% because we've hidden through reserve funding the initial 4%. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, correct.
Okay. Councillors, any other questions for Leanne or Jotham? Shirley, question please. I think you're still muted, Shirley.
I'm getting a sign saying got bad quality. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so just in the back of my head, I'm not saying that it's trendy, but it's a kind of easy thing for the general public to sort of attack the rates rises. It's across the whole country. Everybody's talking about, you know, we've got to have zero rates. We've got to have zero rates. And I'm just wondering what effect, I know you can't put a dollar term on it for everyone, but we often talk in averages. And if we stuck with our original plan, which we're not doing, or we're discussing that today, but the rates increases, is that on a, you know, if we take the average property, is that like $5, $50, $500? I just wonder that there's a lot of emotion involved in it, and I just wonder what the actual figure would be. I didn't explain that very well, did I?
Leanne, are you able to address that?
I believe I can. And the question is,
it
depends. It depends. And this is the hard thing about talking about percentages, because you can see a 5% in one person's property might only be $50, but then in another person's property, that 5% could be 200, it could be 2,000. So it really does depend, because it's always measured against their previous year. The other factor that we often don't realise is that people's properties have completely changed, whether they have last year just had land and then this year they've got property built on it, or they've significantly improved their property, or they may have amalgamated a couple of properties. So it is really hard to talk about percentages.
Sometimes we do talk about, you know, we say, we give an example of an average farm on, you know, in Cromwell or in the Maniatoto, or a hotel or a residential, and we give those examples when we're putting out the rates. So I guess I was just wondering if we could look at a couple of examples.
I've got a couple in front of me here based on our last but based on the draft that went out. So Cromwell residents, surely the one that was put there, that was when we were talking an 11% rates rise for Cromwell. So the example Cromwell residents, it's not necessarily an average one, but an example, was a $285 increase at that 11%. So it was $5 a week. Vincent, the increase was 310 at 30% for an Alexandra residential. So the percentage increases we were talking about for the urban dwellers were kind of that $5, $6, $7 a week back this is pre-COVID, but that's the latest breakdown
Yes,
we've got.
Thank you. That answers that question very well. Thank you, Tim.
Neil, you had a follow-up, and then we'll go to Tracy.
Yeah, just that I guess we've got a great tool online that allows anybody to go and look at the rates for their particular property. And I guess the one thing is that we as elected members are worried about what people might be doing. But I think, and this will sound a little bit simplistic, but I think actually people out there need to take a little bit more responsibility themselves and go and look it up and understand it. And instead of waiting till they get the bill and then, dare I say, complaining about it afterwards. So I'm not knocking them for that, but we need to work hard at finding ways to make sure people can actually make use of the tools that are out there so they understand what the actual impact is on them, because really the averages or the percentages or the increase that I get to what you get, totally irrelevant. The only one I should care about, most people care about, is what's in it for me and what's it going to mean to me. So, you know, that's where we can actually try and encourage people to make better use of that. And then, you know, we'll see more buy-in. We might see some more informed submissions like we've already heard from this morning and we're going to talk about later on.
Thanks, Neil. Tracy, there was a comment from you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Tracy here.
Hi, Tracy.
I guess for coming from a rural background, both, in my opinion, urban and rural, both don't want to see massive swings either way. And Leanne alluded to this, is that by putting money aside and doing things 1 year means that the pain for going forward in future years is going to be a swing in the positive. Now, I have a real issue. I'd prefer if there was a way, I don't know how this would work, but I'd really like to see some kind of thinking around how we keep things a little more smoother, so we don't see these ups and downs. It allows everybody, whether you're rural or urban, to manage their own funding better. And like Neil just said, you can go and have a look, and you know, you can, if you know what your rates are going to be set at the start of the year, you can manage your own finances either way. But I think these big swings, up and down, are not helpful really for anyone.
Certainly next year, I totally agree with you, Tracy. And next year, when we have the long-term plan and the ability to look at our revenue and financing policy, I'm pretty sure we'll be having some conversations around that, because the aberrations that have been thrown up by, in some cases, 100% increases in town values, we can't avoid this year. We've had the word from the legal experts and we can't do anything about it. But what we can do is consider learning from it and looking at that next year when the LTP allows us to. Any other questions for Leanne or Jotham at this stage, councillors? All right, so my reading of the agenda is that presentation is essentially for information. We don't have to receive a report. We simply move on now to the item on page 26, which is the remission policy for extreme financial hardship relating to COVID. And unless I've got that wrong, and I'm sure someone from staff will tell me, that's where we'll head to. So this is a report again. It's yours, Leanne. So I'll let you take us through that report, and then following that, we'll make some motions on that one.
Cool. Thank you. So as I alluded to in my previous presentation, we've looked at the remission policy for the extreme financial hardship, and we already had that policy in our annual plan and long-term plan. What we hadn't covered well was laying out the criteria, and a number of councils have looked at this. We couldn't simply write a new policy purely for COVID-19 unless we go out and consult, and we didn't have the time to do that and still achieve meeting a annual plan timeline. So what I've done, or what the team have done, is review the existing one and tighten up the criteria to make it very transparent to those who apply, but also trying to be consistent and fair, and again, helping a few really well as opposed to helping everyone. The risk we had initially was, and I could use my own home as an example, one of us may still have our job and one of us may not, but the reality is we can still pay our rates, fortunately, and that's real. We feel very blessed to be able to do that. There's homes that genuinely cannot pay their rates, whether it's a nil increase or a 5% increase, they cannot pay their rates. And so it's those few that we need to consider. I think that probably says it all. I've laid out the recommendations, which I think we need to update and adopt the remission policy for extreme hardship and make it available for our public. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Tamer, you're first off the bat for a question.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I just wondered if there was a reason why there was that minimum 5-year ownership on a home.
No, I've been asked that this leading up to this meeting, and no, I believed it was already there, or I have followed another council paper where they've another council. Well, there's a few councils who have done this policy. So, in hindsight, no, I don't believe that's important, and I think there is a risk, as Mayor Tim already suggested to me, that we could be penalising particularly our very new and young families who have just bought a home. So no, I don't believe it's a priority to have that criteria.
That's my thoughts exactly. Thank you.
Yes, I'd agree with that. It seemed to be something that could risk, for no good reason, penalising new homeowners, which are probably more likely to be young homeowners. I'm just having a wee bit of an issue because all my notes have disappeared. Tracy, you have a question while I find myself?
Yes. What I didn't see on that on any of the documentation is what happens if there is a false declaration done or a change in circumstances after the grant or essentially the remission has been made.
That's a really hard one to answer, because one of the other criteria I put in that paper is that we get it witnessed. While that doesn't guarantee any additional honesty, it's just hoping it encourages people to think about the fact that it is a legal declaration. We have recommended only to a maximum of 2 years. That doesn't mean that they get granted at 2 years and then and there. It means they will apply for it annually and their situation may have changed. Again, a bit like any of our remission policies, there's a certain level of trust and doing everything we can to try to mitigate dishonesty where we can. And Mayor Tim, one of the questions you put to me, and I think it might be one of the notes you're trying to find, is why did I have more than one property information valuation number when they've got to be living in the property? And the reason for that is well, there's a couple of reasons, but one of them is we were trying to, again, get them to be honest, and if they've got more than one property, acknowledge it. We do know that some people have family trusts, and so there's a number of members in that family trust, and so again it's trying to check on the property valuations and making sure that the person applying for it truly is living in that property. And also hoping that if they do own more than one property and have rentals, again, that's us trying to discriminate whether they truly are suffering extreme financial hardship.
Would we not simply do a title, would somebody on staff not do a title search as part of this? Because the title searches should show up the, not the trust names, but the actual trustees' names, which still doesn't give you guarantees, but would certainly show if people have more than one property, because I know my concern with this is if you have a home where there's a family or whatever living in it, and they hit very hard times, then that's one matter. But if there's an investment portfolio that's hitting hard times, that's another, in my view. So I'm very much looking at that line that says that the person has to be resident in the home, because that really pulls it into that. But whilst it's highly unlikely that a person making application for this would see the policy, they will see the application sheet, which has 4 lines in it, which tells a story in itself, or could give the wrong impression, I would think.
So again, we're hoping that will encourage them to be honest, because, and yes, we can do a property search, but that's assuming everybody has all of their properties in the identical names, and the reality is they don't, particularly as you come across trusts, blended families, remarriages. So we're trying to entice honesty all the way through, and they can put in an application because they're in the house and they can't afford their rates. But if they own 3 other properties that they're rented out, then my natural instinct would be to go, hang on a minute, the government is making some genuine opportunities for people, you know, with low interest loans. The banks are working with them for mortgage holidays, etc. So council shouldn't be the first port of call.
Well, it would be a matter of selling one of those other properties, wouldn't it?
That would be their call, or they fund it. But again, it's trying to capture we'll use as many mechanisms as we can to entice honesty and understand their true situation.
I think the biggest thing, and I know I've got people waiting to ask questions, so I'll shut up very shortly, is that everybody in the community needs to realise that any rates remission that is given, we are all paying for that. So it would be, I think, incumbent on people, if there is concerns about dishonesty, to come forward and tell the council, because really, if somebody's ripping the council off, they're ripping the community off through our using this policy. Stu, a question from you.
Yeah, hi. It doesn't sit very well with me, this. I've been two or three things. The honesty, to be fair, won't work. And I'm saying I've been looking at the wage subsidy that's been coming out here, and the people that I'd possibly know enough about their business to say that they're testing the boundaries would be an issue. The banks, if you've got property and you can't pay it, you have a mechanism in the banks. And I had a question on the last one. You might be paying $300 more for your house for rent for rates this year, and you may have had a 20 or 30,000 lift in capital value. So a lot of people, that is bankable. I understand that wage earners might be losing a job, it's a different thing. And Minister of Social and Economic Development are your first calls, and so are banks. And yes, we have got a policy. We had an issue, and I can't remember when, back at the Minnetonka Community Board. It doesn't sit with me that the CEO has the authority to delegate who's playing, who's eligible. We actually did that through our community board some time ago. The reason being, we've had 4 CEOs in the last 7 or 8 years, and it's not and staff, so it is a moving target in there. But we, in a community, you say, oh, they've got a rental property in Naseby or Pateroa. They've got another business over here. So you actually, I think if you're going to give delegation to the policy, it goes back to the community board or the chairman of the board to sit on, and they come to a informal session or a publicly excluded session of community boards. So that way, that if there are real issues in Cromwell and people go, hang on a minute, that guy is, well, this company is, you know, so it takes that away a wee bit. But that was only my real comment is honesty. And Tame has brought up, you know, to refer it to the police. Well, you are defrauding the council and you are defrauding the system. And I don't really want to be saying that will happen, but there'll be a lot of people will use that to their advantage. And then if it's a householder, then why don't you do it to business? And that's the other thing. You'll have big businesses. It could be a dairy farm or an orchard has a major problem. And you say, well, we need rate relief. So how can you discriminate between private enterprise and public and business?
So through the chair, if I can respond slightly on that, this is not for commercial. This is not for commercial organisations, and that's very clear in the policy, and that was one of the things that we really needed to make clear. This is for residential properties, and there is the option there for not-for-profit community organisations, but it is not for commercial organisations. They have, it wasn't when we started the reviewing the policy, and I don't understand why we would introduce that at this point. The government has done a lot to alleviate the pain of the business community. I'm not saying there isn't pain, because of course there is, but council can't solve everything for sure.
I'll just pause the questions there. Leanne, I'm looking through it with my eyes trying to see that it plainly says it's residential and with the potential for not-for-profits as well. The objective of the policy is to assist ratepayers experiencing extreme financial hardship. This may include not-for-profits, so that doesn't make it entirely clear. And again, as I say, all my notes have disappeared, so I'm a wee bit behind today, unfortunately.
So I can add more into that if that would meet, if council would like me to do that. The criteria is under C is very much residential properties, and then point 2 of C is not-for-profit community organisations. So under the criteria, it is very clear that it's for rating units for residential purposes.
No, I see that now. By exclusion, it makes it clear. Thank you. Now, who was next? Neil, you were next.
Thank you, Your Worship. The way this is set up with the $2,000 delegation, is my assumption that that's about 80% of an average sort of residential rate bill, about right?
Give or take, and actually I had that in my questions that had come through. Recognising that, and I know it was only after I looked at your question to me, Neil, we tend not to give remissions on, we tend to exclude remissions in water, wastewater and refuse charge, you know, which is typical of any other remission policy. I plucked 2,000, I won't say out of the year, but I just looked at what some of the other councils had done and used that as a figure. What I was trying to achieve was not having to come to council for every remission application, because A, we'll be delaying it, and B, that puts a lot of work on council when it generally is, once council have approved a policy, generally sits with staff to manage. But again,
cool. Thank you.
Open to council.
And I suppose this works that anybody who gets the rebate, then that's it. It's written off and funded from, as we talk about the next agenda item. So that there's no payback for this. This is a total remission, and there's no requirement for it to be paid back into the future.
Correct.
So if a person were to sell the house, they would pay back the arrears on their mortgage and other matters. Why not the rates?
So we can, if they didn't qualify for this, and this is us again trying to, it's recognising this policy existed before COVID-19, so it's always been here. There will always be the extreme, and yes, we can leave the rates attached to the property, because when you sell a house and you have outstanding rates, they are cleared, absolutely. They can be continuing to incur penalties and continuing on. This was recognising that we really were facing, as we've heard it referred to, 1 in a 100-year event, and trying to consider a few of our community that might need genuine help. And again, it came down to helping a few people really well versus trying to help everyone.
Nigel here.
Yes, you're next on my list, Nigel.
I'm interrupting because you made a point that I wanted to talk to, and if I may, because I don't think we've got the right policy here at all myself, and I obviously acknowledge that we've had an existing policy that's been sitting in our long-term plan. But what I say to myself is this is not our job. If rates cannot be paid, then the rating entity should be tagged with the debt. For me, as a council, we are considering reducing the rate rise, and that could be a considerable amount of money. And I hear the arguments about austerity, but and not taking money away. But if you as a council end up not taxing the community $1.5 or $2 million, that's a considerable contribution from council to recognise the situation we're in. But it's not our job to assess hardship. I don't think that council has the skill sets to do it or the experience, and while I'm in full agreement that the CEO should be delegated authority to waive penalty rates and or to put in place a delayed payment program, I think that's, for me, that's as far as we should go. What we are doing with our rates is taxing a financial entity. And if those taxes cannot be paid, then they should be attached as a debt owed to the title to be paid when the property is sold, or if not already cleared in the meantime. And when I look at the application form, like Tracy, there was no talk of sanctions. And if you have an application form that doesn't say at the bottom, and I hear the point about having it witnessed by a JP, but you've got to have something that says if you are lying in your application, then here's the penalty that may be incurred. And I don't believe the application form adequately covers. Relying on honesty is just not going to cut it. People will look at that, and there are myriad. When you look at a household income and look at a household's assets, there's no way that council's got the skill sets, the time, or the forensic ability to go through that application form and make a true assessment. So, for me, attaching the debt to the title is the correct way to approach this, and the relief we give to the ratepayers are in hardship is in our general rating policy. And as an addendum, I know I don't want to get into the next agenda item, but what I would be arguing there is putting aside a fund of $450,000 from an emergency fund specifically to provide for non-payment of rates is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just not the right thing to be doing. So, and for me, the key point is you're rating a financial entity that's a value, and the hardship of the person who can't pay the rates is that they're going to have to access the leverage off that financial entity to pay the rates either now or at a later point, and that should be our policy.
Thank you, Nigel. Cheryl, you were next for a comment.
Yes, hi, thanks, Tim. I'm in agreement, well, semi in agreement with Nigel and Stu, and I don't see why we can't ask for a repayment and it be attached to the title, or allow them a period of time, and it could be 2 years, where they actually are able to pay it off at a small amount, could be on a weekly basis or whatever, so that we help them now, today, but it just means that they are able to pay back the debt over a period of time, or attach it to the property, so that it actually, on the sale of the property, that debt is released. I also don't know that we do have, I'm not sure that we do have the skill set to administer this. I think when you're dealing with banks, they can do credit checks, they can do all sorts of behind the scene investigation,
And so I don't know that we have that ability. So that, yeah, I just think it could create a bit of a nightmare. But I do think that the penalties should be waived, and that we should look at perhaps another way of assisting them. Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. Stephen.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. So I just wanted to make a comment that I agree with Stu, Nigel and Cheryl on the what they're suggesting, and I think probably, I guess that at some point you're going to figure out whether everyone else does agree. I certainly believe that any debt should be, or non-payment of rate should be tagged to the property going forward. That's something that I firmly believe in. I don't think it's our role to carry that debt, and we're doing it for other. We've got to think about the other ratepayers we represent as well. So that's something I firmly believe in.
What I'm considering doing is this, Leanne. I'm hearing a bit of concern and sharing some of that myself. First question, there isn't a time crunch on this. This could be tweaked following comments, and I am going to ask other councillors who I haven't heard from, but this could be changed, tweaked, and brought back to us in June without any great, or depending on staff availability. When do we have to have a decision on this done by?
There is no panic, because this is as I said, this policy does already exist. My concern was being inundated with applications and not having sufficient criteria, but we can easily bring this back in June. Absolutely.
Marvellous. Well, what I'm going to do, thank you for that, Leanne. What I'm going to do is I want to hear from the other councillors who haven't commented on this, just where any extra thoughts they have, or agreeing or disagreeing or whatever, so that staff have an idea of a general view, that we can come back with something perhaps a bit different well, as suits, perhaps in June. So Martin, what are your thoughts?
I have some concerns about opening floodgates for this. We've seen, like with the government's wage subsidy, how some people have watered that, and you know that's been checked by checking. You could check out government websites to see who got it. So that's where people who've been getting it, who don't deserve it, have been dobbed in. Now that's a bit extreme for us to do with ratepayers. I do agree that any debt should be tagged to the property, and it does frighten me that we could open the floodgates for a whole lot of these. And do we have the expertise and the staff to actually manage it correctly, or would it end up becoming a rubber stamping exercise and those costs pushed on across all ratepayers? So yeah, I have got some worries about it.
Thank you, Martin. Lindley. I think you're still muted, Lindley.
Sorry about that.
You're right. We've all done it.
I'm sharing the concerns expressed, and I'd be happy to come back in June to readdress this issue. And we also want to be careful that we don't create a bow wave for ratepayers themselves. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I share Martin's concerns in regards to the increased workload and costs that could be required to administer the system.
Thank you. And Shirley. Still muted, I think, Shirley. Shirley may be having some microphone concerns, because she has typed in the comments bar that she has the same concerns and feels it should be tagged back on the property, to be tagged to the property to be paid. So I think there's some consistent views there, and what I'm picking up is that councillors are recognising that there is a need for us to meet genuine needs at the time that those needs are there. And I think that's a big part of the tagging to the property, is that people's circumstances change, and this whatever we're heading into, we don't know yet how long it's going to last, but it may be that we get a V-shaped recession and things in a year or two. Two's probably the optimistic end, will be somewhat back to normal. So the whole community taking a debt on that may later be able to be repaid seems to have a concern amongst the whole troop. And I'm wondering perhaps if the application form could be put in the form of a statutory declaration, which gives it more teeth, as Tamer's mentioned. If somebody does lie on the form, well, it's fraud, and that's a lot easier to deal with at a police level if they've done a statutory declaration. So what I'm minded to do is this, as soon as I can get myself to the right page, bear with me for a moment, is to take ourselves back to page 26. We'll move A, but B would be, and Rebecca, help me with the wording if you wish, would be that the report lies on the table to come back in June with amendments made as indicated. Rebecca, I'll let you perhaps put some words together. Neil, you had a comment on the current policy.
Yeah, I just think that my recollection is that every year we do the annual plan, we also, or maybe it's a long-term plan, we confirm the rating policy as well. Within the rating policy, there are a number of other things that include the rates remissions and that sort of thing, and there's also a rates remission policy in its own right. So, and it talks about the extreme hardship and other grounds. So I think we would probably, with this new one that's being proposed, need to actually do some consequential amendments to what else already exists. Otherwise, we're going to have some duplication. So I think with what you're proposing, Tim, there's a good chance to work that through, because if we do adopt it all as part of the annual plan adoption, and we adopt the rating policy then as that, and even if we don't, it doesn't matter, it's still the same logic applies. And the other thing too, it's important, I think we have a new policy that probably needs to have a short-term review date, not for 12 months, probably a shorter period for something else to see if it's working. And otherwise, I agree with letting the staff spend some more time on it to get something that's going to work going forward. Picking up the concerns being expressed is the logical way forward.
Thank you. So Rebecca has put up on the screen that we can read. So A will be receives the report and accepts the level of significant. B, that the report lies on the table to come back to the 3 June meeting, council meeting, to reflect the discussion held today. Would somebody care to move A and B?
I will.
Thank you, Neil. Seconded.
Nigel.
Tracy did it by writing, so I'm going to give Tracy the win on that one. So all those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
And against? That is carried. Thank you very much, councillors. That was a very good discussion. This brings us now to our and staff as well. That was very helpful. This brings us to our disaster recovery reserves, page 36 on the agenda. And this again, Leanne, you're getting all the good stuff out the way before lunch, eh?
It's a busy day, isn't it?
Isn't it even?
So this came about particularly from the executive committee when it was raised that we had this disaster recovery reserve, which I have to be honest, I didn't realise we had. So I'll take the paper as read, and we did attach papers taking the council through the history of it to make it easier. I guess the main points to note is that yes, we do have reserves available, and of that, the accumulated interest was 974,000, and the reserve base, excluding the interest, is another 1.3 million. So we're well over the 2 million in that particular reserve. The recommendations I made, I suggested being put, although they're in the paper for now, I did wonder if you'd come back to this after we've done the annual plan and the deliberations, because the decision council makes around the annual plan and the use of reserves and how they want to, which reserves they want to use, may influence this particular paper. Happy to take questions.
Leanne, Martin here. Are you suggesting that we just put this on the table until later on today, and not treat it as a complete separate item in regard to how we use reserves in general in the annual plan process?
My suggestion is that council may choose to use some of these reserves specifically to offset some of the rates increase that we're incurring in the annual plan. However, I believe we need to have a discussion on what costs these reserves might fund or offset if we were going to if council was going to go down that track, because this reserve is funded across the district and some of the increases aren't district-wide increases, and I guess that becomes then the question, which cost would you choose to use this particular reserve for?
Some of our districts, Martin here again, have got better reserves than others and are probably in a better position to fund some savings, whereby this, as it's been rated across the district, could apply to some of those increases that are at a district level, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted there. I was talking to myself. Thank you to those who pointed that out. I think what might be more pertinent, Martin, than what you said is that if we were to choose to apply all or some of this fund to, for instance, waste management, then that could be seen, or would have the effect of reducing some of the impacts that we have on the urban ratepayers who, because we can't change the land value weightings, are suffering quite a hit this time around. Now, it won't take anything off the decrease that the rural properties would get, but we would have to also be conscious that the rural and the urban and everybody has put into this. And that's where it might get interesting. But I think this is a conversation for after the annual plan. Nigel, you had a comment.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I would have thought that this is a conversation to have after the annual plan, but I would make the point just relative to the previous agenda item that we've just discussed, that I would be opposed in whatever we end up doing with using this fund to allocate any sum of money, let alone $450,000 for a specific purpose such as being suggested for rates remission. My opposition to that is in principle.
All right, well, we might just park that at the moment, because I think, again, that would probably need to come in after our annual plans discussion, but I take your point. Neil, a question from you?
Yeah, I don't think there's any harm in actually doing resolutions A and B now. And then as we go through the nuts and bolts of the annual plan and finalising things, then you've got the backup of actually having separately considered the disaster recovery reserve and the use of that for something going forward. We don't have to do it. So in the annual plan deliberations, we can choose not to or to. So the resolution B gives you that framework. C, I think at this stage you just leave out until we get the policy revised and finalised, if it ever gets there. But I think you can do A and B now, and we're all good going forward.
May I just
please
speak one more on that? So the figure I've put in there for B relates to conversation I would probably want to lead council with a bit later. So that's the figure that I'm suggesting may not be. You may choose a different figure than what I've put there. I certainly accept that C's based on the last conversation not accepted, which means you may want to increase your figure in B.
Yeah, the order you've got provides for that.
we won't know what we want to do. So if we can go down two paths. We can go down what you suggest, Neil, is in which case we know we've got 511,000 in the kitty to apply once we've worked out our annual plan numbers, or in the alternative, that's if we move A and B. In the alternative, we park this now. We do our annual plan deliberations in the knowledge that we either have 511 or indeed 961,000 by my maths that we could use depending on where the AP discussions take us. So I don't see the benefit in tying our hands now when they're perfectly able to be, this is perfectly able to be used later on. Stephen, you had a question?
The maximum that could be used under that scenario would be 974, is that correct? That's the interest. You can only use the interest, I believe, to offset rates. Is that?
Yeah, 961.
961.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the maximum we could use. That's correct. Neil, you had another question?
I might have got this wrong, but I took the 450 actually wasn't coming from the interest, that was coming from the fund. Can we clarify that, please?
Yeah.
I had actually worked it all coming from the interest and not touching the fund itself, but that was just a suggestion again. And I think if we're true to the interest, I think we always have to leave 50k in. Pretty sure that's what I read somewhere in one of the papers.
50k of interest.
Yeah, I'm sure I read that somewhere in one of the. I read a lot. It was a while ago since I read this, but I'm pretty certain that in one of them, they recommended we always leave 50k of interest. Just trying to remember where I saw that. Here we go. No, that's the 500. I might just be confusing myself.
All right.
Seen a lot of numbers lately.
I can well imagine you have. Stu, you had a comment?
The capital component, to get 500,000 interest at 2% or accumulated interest, how long has that been accumulated for? Because it doesn't add up to me that, or if I've read it wrong, because even on 1.2 million at 2%, which we borrow from the government or lend internally, doesn't come up to $400,000.
Some of this would have been in the bank at periods of time where there were higher interest rates than currently, though, Stu.
Our savings, capital savings in our bank is the stuff we're looking at. Out of our 20 million or 16 million or whatever we've got.
No, in this particular fund.
Yeah,
Leanne,
well,
can you answer that?
I'm hoping Jotham's listening in, because Jotham went through, we had to go back through some very old data, including our old finance system, because this has gone longer than our current finance system works. I know we had $1 million put in up front back in 1999, and we've paid small amounts into that, and then it's accumulated interest. And I cannot answer the breakdown sitting here.
I would argue put $1 million in a year, and we haven't put $1 million in a year. That would be $20 million in that capital account, which I don't think it is in there. That $500,000 accumulated interest, it should only be $40,000 or $50,000 worth of interest.
Sorry, I didn't say we put in $1 million a year. We put in $1 million up front in 1999.
Yeah, but if we had put in $1 million a year, it would still only be at 20 million plus interest. That's all I'm saying.
We haven't put in $1 million every year. We put in $1 million up front in 1999. And there was a number of years where we didn't put any additional funds into this reserve.
I understand that. But what I'm saying is 400,000 interest is a lot of interest on probably a small balance, I guess I'm saying, considering that our interest bill average in the last 10 years may have been 4.5% or 5%.
Jotham here. So as Leanne mentioned, we started out with $1 million in 1999, and we've been averaging about 70,000 in interest in that account. So our interest rates per annum, yes, our interest rates have varied between 4% to 3% in those years. Our most recent interest rate is at 3.5%. So that's about 69,000. So yes, that it started off at $1 million, and we've just been building interest. And right now, that account sits at about 2.5 million. And all that has, yeah.
So that's been accumulating interest paid back onto the principal amount, correct?
Yes.
The principal has been accumulating every year, and then you get interest on top of the interest, obviously yearly, and there is times where we've added additional payments into that account because the principal is more than $1 million now.
I understand that. I do understand borrowing, but the principal amount that is sitting there now is about $2.5 million, correct?
Correct.
And if you multiply 3.5 to 4% over $2.5 million, you end up with about 80 or 85,000. I haven't got a calculator in front of me, but I guess that's what it would be.
Yeah.
Would that not be the fee? So how does, I don't get, unless you're saying that you've accumulated the interest plus interest and you've added that interest to it to get 400,000, or am I completely wrong? Because I would have thought if I had $2.5 million in the bank and I got 4% interest paid to my account, I'd only have 80 to spend as the interest component of $2.5 million, not 450,000. Or I'd have an 8% return on investment.
Well, Stewie, I've just grabbed an online compound interest calculator, and just with $1 million without any annual addition for 20 years, which is what we've had, at an interest rate of 3%, which is swings and roundabouts over that period of time, you'd have 1.8 million left. So it's no surprise that when we've topped this up on occasion as well, that there is 900,000 there by that rudimentary maths.
Yeah. But we've still only got a capital value left of $2.5 million. That's what we're working our interest component today.
Yeah, it's the time factor that's allowed it to build so much. So
I understand
this is a rainy
that.
day fund and it's bucketing down outside.
I understand that. It's just that how do we arrange at the figure of $400,000 worth of capital if you've used interest over the whole time and accumulated that in a different account? It's just, is it taken on the capital value now, or is the interest put aside somewhere else and been relent within council? That's, I guess, the question I'm asking.
Neither. I do believe, Jotham, if I recall right, that we have the councillors use that reserve at some stage.
Yes,
you
they
mentioned
have.
there was a couple of withdrawals.
Yes, and I'm just trying to find that information. There were a couple of withdrawals in the past.
I think we really have to rely on staff here that have done the background work, and I'm comfortable if they say that money is there as accumulated interest, even if there has been some withdrawals, there's been some deposits as well. And a rough calculation, even from the $1 million, tells her, or Nigel's done some figures as well, that it's going to be there or thereabouts. I'm not sure where we go with it other than trusting staff, which I'm perfectly willing to do. I want to take us back to the previous question of what we do. I'm conscious of the time as well and the need that some people will have to have a short break. We have other discussions coming up today on other ways that we can reduce costs and so forth. And I think that's going to be a fundamental point as to how much we're going to need or want to lean upon this fund. And it's for that reason that I'm wanting to park this paper, as has been suggested by staff, until the annual plan paper has been gone through, because I believe that we're going to have a clearer picture then of what we need to be doing. At the moment, we have not as clear a picture, and there's no detriment that I can see of leaving this on the table, even if we have our annual plan discussion, then come back to this and then do the resolutions on the annual plan. I don't believe that we're any worse off by doing that, and there's no benefit in tying our hands right now, unless you can see any, Leanne.
No, I can't.
Okay. On that basis, that's the way I intend to proceed with this, conscious of the time and the amount of work that we have to get through today. I think that's the best way to progress this. And I'm aware, Rebecca, somewhere up amongst this chain of documents, you had said that you wanted something to be able to say something before lunch, but I've lost where it went.
Oh, thank you. 2 comments. Will you resolve to lie that on the table?
Do we have to do that if it's going to be dealt with in the same meeting?
I just think because we did for the last report, it would be consistent.
The last report's going through to the June meeting. This isn't. This is going to be dealt with today.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to remind people that there are 2 invitations, that there is a new invitation for the afternoon session, a new link on the website for those watching at home, that hopefully will soon move into non-public and then adjourn for lunch and come back up to you, of course, as chair around 1 o'clock.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Rebecca. So we're going to move to go. So the plan from here is we're going to move to go into non-public. Then we're going to adjourn for lunch. We've chewed up 12 minutes. So I'm intending to come back into our non-public session at 12:35. So we split the difference between our losses and our gains. And we will endeavour to go back into the public session at 1 o'clock. Rebecca, if we're a bit late on that, is that a major problem?
It will just have people online waiting.
Yeah, we're not breaching any laws though. There'll be a sign up saying we'll be back at 1 or as close as we can to that. So can somebody please move we go into public excluded?
Yes, I'll move that, Shirley.
Thank you, Shirley, and seconded. Martin was quickest on the keyboard, so Martin seconded that. All those in favour? Aye. And against? That is carried. I look forward to any members of the public or the press who are watching to rejoin us as close to 1 as we can make it. We have gone a little bit over time in the morning session, and a reminder that it is a new link because we can't, we have to break this one and start a new one. You'll find that councillors in your calendars and members of the public on the same place, I presume, on the website that you found this one. So we can end this part of our meeting now and hang up and rejoin at 12:35. Thank you, councillors and staff. Thank you.
Thank you.